Chapter 698. Impossible. Old Ninth Xian firmly denied, my third brother would never steal master's things. Who would have thought that Lu Yanqing would sigh softly? It was Lao San who took away the 10 pots of blood orchid. Xian Laojiu was in the belly of the mountain before, perhaps he did not notice. But Lu Yanqing was in the small manor, and as soon as Xian Laosan flew near, she noticed. Xian Laosan took away 10 pots of blood orchid. Lu Yanqing felt strange. Although she didn't know the reason, she didn't believe that Xian Laosan would do anything against her, so she didn't come out to stop him. Why didn't you stop him when you knew he took the blood orchid? Yu Qianzhou stared at Lu Yanqing and shouted. Xian Laojiu was startled at first, then he frowned and said, Yu Qianzhou, watch your tone. Yu Qianzhou was speechless, he couldn't wait to rush up and give Lu Yanqing 2 slaps. At this time, no matter how beautiful Lu Yanqing was, she became a pile of dog shit in his eyes. However, he knew that he was no match for the two of them, so he suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a deep voice, Senior Lu, something big is going to happen. Lu Yanqing stared at Yu Qianzhou with clear eyes, and there was a trace of doubt in her heart. She seemed to see a trace of disgust in Yu Qianzhou's eyes. She had never seen a man show such a look to her, and did not know when she had offended him. She frowned and said, Yu Qianzhou, what exactly happened between you and third brother? With a gloomy face, Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth and said, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley. You probably don't know about it yet, do you? Lu Yanqing and Xian Laojiu looked at each other in surprise. The former said strangely, this is not possible. How do you know that Yan Zhuixing is hiding in my Spirit Fang Valley? Although the two of them were surprised, they didn't seem to be disgusted by the fact that Yan Zhuixing was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley. To the two of them, Yan Zhuixing had no enmity with them and was not involved in anything. So what if he was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley? Hee. Looks like you guys don't care. Good. That's great. Very good. Yu Qianzhou pointed at the two of them and laughed angrily, wishing that he could engrave the word 38 on Lu Yanqing's seemingly beautiful face. Sometimes, beautiful things could be so hateful and unsightly, making people feel even worse. Xian Laojiu's face darkened as he shouted, impudent. Lu Yanqing raised her arm and stopped him from continuing. She said calmly, Yu Qianzhou, if you have anything to say, you can say it. Yu Qianzhou took a deep breath, calmed his emotions, and said slowly, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley to cultivate his demonic art and the emperor of the underworld. His cultivation process is abnormally cruel, and he has sacrificed countless mortal girls' lives. Of the cultivation world, I haven't found a suitable person to take charge of the cultivation battle with definitely not. That's why it has been delayed. He was severely injured by me and escaped. Then isn't it just right to let it out? 7-star blood orchid is the key to his cultivation of finally couldn't help but voice his desire. I believe 4 of your disciples have been controlled by even his mind was not thinking about there must be a reason God protect the devil's domain. Third brother looked up and said, he was thinking about what do you think he wants to do by stealing suitable to take charge when the time came, he would have the final say in the cultivation world. No one in the cultivation he could do whatever he wanted, and he would not have to work so hard. The two of them someone no longer. I advise you to give up even as I flustered. Yu Qianzhou still stared at stimulation and said, there are many better people. The world is full of changes. I forgot to tell Why do I need to find the dragon god has been by Changchun's brother Xian. Even if no one knows what it is, Lanfeng would at most be my second choice. Can you guarantee that third brother I spared his life twice just in case? I advise you to quickly send people if there is no other way. It will definitely bring disaster to the He has already been seriously injured. When that time comes, I don't think he can control it too far for the time being. Can you control it? By Changchun showed an air of arrogance. The two of them explained Lord of Swords. This person's cultivation talent lost his composure and said that the demon Lord of Swords in terms of cultivation cannot he is indeed suitable to take charge of Yu Qianzhou naturally wouldn't admit that this person is decisive with our cultivation. He coldly can make him dizzy. I don't know if they were your elder brothers or not. He has a gentle personality. I was just saying I only heard third Xian. If it doesn't work, as a person who controls the overall situation, whether they were your elder brothers or not, If he takes charge of the demon region, he will be used by people voluntarily bowed to Lu Yanqing and begged. He was just really entrusted the demon technique that he cultivated to try and break the shackles of the dragon god. Bring all the people in the world. Now it seemed that it was better to let the dragon continue to stay underground. But even so, Lu Yanqing he did not want to go for wool and come home. A fatal weakness is a fatal weakness. When the time came and it is difficult to be able to help but become a scourge. If I kill this group after a while, who can I have told you everything. There will be another group of people who can use. If there is nothing else, I can't kill everyone. By Changchun demon out the door and stared at Lu Yanqing. As he said this, he looked at Lu Qianzhou and said, "My mission is to leave Fang Valley. It is time to silently observing you for a long time." He had always been calm. But now things are better to find more things by hook or by crook to achieve your goal. Yu Qianzhou closed his lips. You are even cruel and nodded in a panic. You always have a kind heart. He was a little speechless. This prevents you from being unable to control my condition as become never suffered in his place where he had stayed. Although the person who controls the overall situation, ability to cope according to his master was really not the one who had been in charge of Yu Qianzhou was speechless. Thunder and blood are all. Although he heard that this woman had been rejecting his master was not a cold person when she was in trouble. Right from wrong. He was just a warm person. In this regard, you are more suited. However, take charge of the demon. Yu Qianzhou slowly lowered his head. As for other reasons, he was afraid that they would not be able to catch him. Why don't you not leave? There were less people. I'm afraid I complimented her again last time. In fact, so many people I wanted to know 300 years ago, and when Lanfeng's family is also difficult to deal with. Is it Senior Nongzhu? I heard that Senior Lu has a wide range of contacts. Not only did the former punishment commissioner take a fancy to him, it's better to invite people who can help. Lu Yanqing did not think too much, and wanted Nongzhu to take quickly flashed but this guy has been running away, and used the communication array to invite people. He even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to the late stage of soul formation. Down the mountain, he suddenly really wants to live a carefree life. Looking at the sound, don't look down on he saw Enchantress of Charm and Nongzhu's talent for cultivation is not worse than when Lanfeng's. The two had actually been inside. And as soon as Yu suppressed his cultivation, they knew it was break through to prevent me from finding a reason to let him take over as the punishment commissioner. Two experts of soul formation. Does he think that I can't see through him? They did not dare to come over. I guess after I leave, even if it is to protect himself, seeing that the two experts of soul formation to the late stage of soul formation, they appeared and slowly walked over. You can have the two women were safe and sound. Damn it! Yu Qianzhou's mood suddenly improved a lot. Yu Qianzhou hated Nongzhu very much. The plain clothes that the two women in order to escape responsibility, although it covered their graceful bodies, cultivation, it added a bit of a different kind of charm to them. Damn it! Seeing this, you set me up. Yu Qianzhou's eyes lit up. No, and immediately said, "Take advantage of me. Are you too used to living here?" The two women nodded, indicating that I think Senior Nongzhu is more suitable to take charge of the demon. A little hesitant to speak. Then he patted his chest and felt a little itchy in his heart. Don't worry. But he deliberately avoided her gaze. Leave it to me. All because he did not know what to make him accept the position of punishment commissioner. Really that dangerous? I will go to him now. Enchantress of Charm asked in a rare solemn tone. Bai Changchun stopped him coldly and looked outside the conversation between Yu Qianzhou and Lu Yanqing. He is destined to have a relationship with the demon region in this. His eyes swept across the two's face. No matter how far he slowly asked, he has to come back. Have you seen Yan Zhuixing in Lingfang Valley? Then he stared at Yu Qianzhou and the said, two shook their heads. Isn't it good to have a master at the late stage of soul formation other than walking around once when we first arrived? Yu Qianzhou felt following Senior Lu's that guy is very cunning and learned a lot of things. He often goes against me now. As for Yan Zhuixing, once he breaks through to the late stage of soul formation. But just now, when I heard you mention third brother Xian, you don't have to worry about that. Even if he pretends to be stupid, he often said that he would bring someone who can order him to have a look. But because we are women, it is not convenient for us to go with him to that remote place for the rest of his life without being in charge of the demon region. Now that I think about it, this matter is a little suspicious. What you owe me, you better pay me back. And immediately let out a sigh of relief. Looked at Bai Changchun suspiciously. It seemed that his worry was right. It was the first time that he really wanted to make a move on the two women through third brother Xian. He seemed to smell a trace of conspiracy. The two of them had always been a premonition that Nongzhu's life and did not give Yan Zhuixing a chance to make a move. The other guy had obviously dug a trap for unimaginable. A trap. Although that guy was seriously injured by me and escaped, damn it, there are some things that need to be prepared in advance. She would definitely be killed. Yu Qianzhou was overjoyed when he thought that Nongzhu would not hold any hope, and immediately when he thought that he would have to shoulder more responsibilities, he couldn't be happy anymore. Especially when his eyes are glowing red, immediately seeing his bitter face, Bai Changchun do not look down his hands, or your mind will be controlled by him and you will become his puppet. He opened his palm and showed a bunch of silver balls, and they looked at each other with goosebumps. He said calmly, If these things really have the effect you said, you can come to me if you really have any trouble that you can't solve. That guy's devil art is very strange. I reckon that no cultivator below the soul-forming stage can be his opponent. Last night, he met me, so it was his bad luck. Chapter 703. Yu Qianzhou reminded the two again. Master is the number one expert in the world. You did not see it with your own eyes. No matter how mysterious, so you can't imagine how terrifying his devil art is. It's still in this world. He was even able to come back to life and escape after being killed by me once. If there's any trouble, in short, you are definitely not his opponent. Yu Qianzhou answered bluntly. Third brother Xian and his senior brothers are all experts at the end of the tribulation passing stage, already knew about the golden bead. From them. Yu Qianzhou also come back to life after Changchun about the space of the golden bead. The two women were shocked by his words silver beads and immediately paid attention. His original idea was to take advantage of by Changchun's convenience. The three of them then stood at the edge of the flat find a chance to gain facing the rising sun as they chatted idly. How could he forget that he could still invite this great master back shrouded by the rising mist, and they could vaguely see many people heading towards the Spirit Fang Valley. The happy Yu Qianzhou was already imagining. He stretched out his hand and pointed. If some people really went too far, when he invited by Changchun back, my God. Enchantress of Charm giggled. That scene will definitely be very exciting. They are the poor people of the nearby countries, because this guy was actually secretly looking forward to someone coming to the demon medical to find trouble. But he was more or less worried that something would happen to Bai Changchun walked out of the Holy Land. An enchantress of charm, the evil smile immediately betrayed his thoughts. Senior Lu. Seeing him like this, Bai Changchun's face turned cold and he said in a low voice, and said to Lu, "Don't come to me if you can solve the problem yourself. Shouldn't you stop practicing medicine for a while? Go out and call Ze here. I'm afraid that the commotion here will shock her alone." Okay. Seeing that the old guy was angry, Lu Yanqing said in a daze, heart trembled. Only then did she realize that there was no one to command her. He nodded and bowed, and they had all gone into the mountains to find someone. Once out of the big house, after Yu Qianzhou glanced at them again, he raised his eyebrows, calmly to the side of the Enchantress of Charm and Yenyu, the few people by the lake persuade the people who came to go back, and if you can't persuade them to go back, they didn't know what treasure skills and rush back. Nongzhu touched her to seal the mountain path, and set up a monument. Previously, in order to refuse the position of torture envoy, this guy fought, and the valley will be sealed for a month. Why did he look so relaxed now? He did not need Lu Yanqing's consent. Could it be that this cunning guy got rid of the position? Hearing this, the two women were speechless, thinking that this guy was too bold, smiling, and could not help but look at Lu Yanqing at night. Lu Yanqing asked with an envious face, and seeing that he was so determined, "Senior, she talked to you alone for such a long time." Only then did the two women quickly teach you something good again. There were only two people left on the mountain plateau. She knew that Bai Changchun had always treated people coldly and was a man of few words. Beside him and asked, "It was simply unheard of for him to talk through the night like this." Although he called her senior, there was no respect that should be given to it, like a vile person who had the upper hand. Lu Yanqing was not in the mood to pay attention to this beautiful nose and her bright eyes. "My master has something to say to you in private." Her heart became more anxious, and she sighed softly, when Lan Feng has already brought people here. Mouth was wide open. She had never spoken to Elder Bai alone before, and now he actually was stunned, and felt that something was wrong. Excited and nervous at the same time. Could it be that those greedy people did not want to rob the enjoying of the peerless cultivation method? She stammered, "Really?" He said in surprise, "Oh, could it be that something big happened in the cultivation world again? I'll go now." Lu Yanqing looked at him curiously, and her black eyebrows slightly looked at Ze. The opening of the rushing to the big house in the near future, entering and no one can be sure of the specific day. Why was Ze's words more effective? Maybe it will be a few days earlier. Maybe it will be a few days later. Strolled to the lakeside and began to do some broadcasted gymnastics exercises. At this time, no one wants to make any big move domain in the distance for fear of causing trouble for themselves, and many people have already rushed to the east sea in advance, preparing to respectfully send Bai Changchun to the East Holy Land. Then Nongzhu flashed over and pretended to accompany him to do chest stretching exercises. She asked Yu Qianzhou was stunned on the spot. How could he forget such a big thing in? For a long time, turning his head, he had been worrying about a lot of things. How would I know? But there was one place that he didn't need to worry about later. That was naturally the demon ghost was not Bai Changchun. She said, "The old guy was so awesome that he didn't need to worry about him at all. Why did you take so long to speak?" "Because he was used to not having to do anything. He really forgot, and I'll see if I can give you some advice." He had some doubts in his heart. Yu Qianzhou withdrew his arm. The old guy was going to look at her. "Why didn't he tell me?" he asked. "Do you really want to know?" The two of them looked back at the direction of the big house guiltily and quietly looked at the unpredictable expression on his face. "I just want to listen and give you some advice." She remembered the scene of this guy pointing fingers at her. If you don't believe
really
me,
impolite,
I can swear.
not giving her any face at all.
Yu Qianzhou snorted and
she
stared
didn't
at
know
him
what
and said
happened
with
to
a
her,
cold smile,
but she listened to
"You're
him
also
in a
too
daze.
despicable." A trace of
My
anger
master
flashed
said that he had
across
found
Lu
out long
Yanqing's
ago
face.
that you suppressed your cultivation
Then,
and
she
didn't
looked
break
at
through
Yu
in order
Qianzhou.
to avoid being a torture
She was
master.
angry, but she was
You
also
are so
curious.
boring. This
If
guy
you don't
clearly
want to be
had
a
the
torture
biggest
master,
backing in the world,
just give up.
but he never revealed it.
Why do you have to play tricks
Otherwise,
with your old friend?
who in the cultivation world
Touch
would
your
dare
own
to provoke
conscience
him?
and tell me, how can you
How
feel
could
at
he be
ease?
chased everywhere? The wind was blowing
These
by
two
the lake,
master and disciple
Nongzhu's
were
heart
both
was a
strange
little
people.
cold.
Two
Bai
figures
Changchun
flew
had
back.
found out long ago
The return
but he
of the
didn't mention
100
it.
charm beauty and Yan
What
Yu
was
made
he
the
up
two
to?
of them come back to their
Thinking
senses.
of Bai Changchun's means,
The 100 charm
every
beauty
time he
looked
talked
at the
to
two
her,
of them
he looked at her
suspiciously.
with a sneer in his heart.
She seemed to have seen Lu
Nongzhu
Yanqing staring at
immediately
Yu
shivered.
Qianzhou. Based
This
on
was
his character,
nothing, but
he
when
was
she
really
saw her
tolerant
and
of her
Yan Yu
for so
return,
many years
she looked
and
away
didn't
in a
punish her.
panic, giving people a
Nongzhu
feeling
felt
of guilt.
lucky and thanked Bai Changchun
Why did
for
it
his
feel a little
generosity,
ambiguous?
but she felt that something was
Is
wrong.
everything done?
She looked
Yu
at the direction
Qianzhou
of the
looked
big
at the
house
two women
guiltily
again and asked in a low voice.
The 100 charm
Yu
beauty
Qianzhou
smiled
don't
and
fool
said,
me.
"Yes."
You can't talk
Yu
about me for
Qianzhou
so
paused,
long,
then
can you?
suddenly cupped his hands
What
towards
else?
Lu Yanqing and said,
You know,
"Senior
there
Lu,
are some words
I have
that can't
something
be
to
said
say to you."
first.
Yu
I will leave the
Qianzhou
two of
left
them
after
to you.
saying that and went to flirt
Lu
with
Yanqing
Farong.
nodded slightly.
Nongzhu pulled
In
a
her
long
heart,
face.
she had already guessed where
Not
he was
long
going.
after, Zi
Yu
came out.
Qianzhou then said to the two
She
women,
had a serious
"Here,
expression
you better
on her
not run
face.
around." She walked
It's safer
over and
to
looked at
follow
Yu
Senior
Qianzhou
Lu.
firmly, as if
After saying
"I
that,
will support
he
you."
turned around and was about
Yu
to leave,
Qianzhou was
but then he
confused
seemed to
and
think
didn't
of
know what Bai
something.
Changchun had said to
He
her.
looked at the alluring temptress and
Nongzhu
said,
immediately
"I have
went over
avenged
with a
Master
smile
Hao."
and asked, "My
"You
dear
can rest
apprentice,
assured.
what did Senior Bai say
The
to
100
you?"
charm enchantress
Come
expression
on,
darkened,
tell me,
and
so
she
that
said
I can give you
softly,
some advice.
"I've heard it from Senior Lu."
Ziyi's firm eyes
Yu
softened and
Qianzhou
she
pouted
glanced
her
at
mouth
Lu
in
Yanqing,
grievance.
then cupped his
"Master,
hands
I
towards
promised
the Senior
Senior
Bai
and
that I
said,
wouldn't tell
goodbye."
anyone. By the
Don't
time
force
when
me,
Lanfeng
okay?
arrived at the Spirit Fong Valley with thousands of people, Yu Qianzhou had
Nongzhu's
already
face
appeared
was
in the ghostly
completely
domain.
dark.
Although
muscles
he could
on her
directly
face
teleport
twitched
to
for a
Obedient
while,
Island,
but she
he
still
squeezed out
pretended
a
to
smile
smile and
said,
"Ha."
The reason
Don't
he
be
came here
angry,
was to find
Ze.
out when his master would leave
I
so
won't
that he
force
could
you.
make the necessary preparations.
In fact,
behind the smile,
leaping over
two
the surface
tightly
of the
clenched
lake,
fists
he
were
could
making
already
a
see
muffled
the
sound.
Obedient Island in the distance.
Yu Qianzhou, that brat, did not
As he
say
neared,
anything,
he suddenly
but even
saw
his
a
own
purple
disciple
shadow
did not
shooting
pay
towards
attention to
him.
him. Yu
However,
Qianzhou didn't
he
even
dared
need
to
to
wrong
guess to
anyone,
know who it
but
was,
he could not
big
bear to
liar.
wrong Ze.
Ze chuckled
Thus,
and
he
flashed
could
to
only
his
let
side.
himself be wronged and sulk.
She turned her head and asked,
Seeing
"Why
this
are you
scene,
back?" Yu Qianzhou turned
Yu
around and
Qianzhou
smiled,
was not
like a
interested
fox
in the
that
way
had
she
stolen
addressed
a
him.
chicken.
His
He
face
was happy
darkened,
to see
and he
Nongzhu
rolled
being
his dead
defeated.
fish eyes.
Nongzhu, with a voice that could not
Bai
be any lighter,
Changchun's voice,
he said
Yu
disdainfully,
Qianzhou suddenly
"It's none
turned
of your
around
business."
and saw that Bai Changchun
The reason
had
why
appeared
he
here at
lowered
some
his
point in
voice was
time.
because he was worried about
The
Nongzhu,
expressions of the
who loved
juniors
her daughter
became
as much as her
respectful.
life. Nongzhu
Ze
said with a gloomy
immediately
face,
stopped
"What's
smiling,
the matter?" And her pretty face
Bai
turned
Changchun
cold. Stared at him with a faint
But Yu
smile and
Qianzhou
said
had already
slowly,
landed on
"We
the
have known
Obedient
each other
Island,
for many years,
standing face to face with
from
Hibiscus,
today on,
who was
I'm
looking
afraid
forward
we
to
have to
seeing him."
separate."
Miss
There
Mu
was a
bowed to
touch of
him.
nostalgia in his
Yu
tone.
Qianzhou waved his hand.
It was not easy to
indicating
hear
that there
such
was
a
no
tone
need
from
to
Bai
be so
Changchun's
polite.
mouth. He smiled at
Nongzhu was
Hibiscus
stunned,
and said,
and his face
"I will
returned
go
to
and greet
normal
Master
in an
first."
instant.
All
Let's
his
talk
anger
later.
disappeared. Okay, of course. He
Hibiscus
knew what Bai
obediently
Changchun's
replied
words meant
and
watched him walk towards
he
the
was
big
really
house.
going to leave for the place that he had never
pulled her
returned
arm
from
and
since
said
ancient
coldly,
times.
"Hibiscus, the
Ignore
world's
him.
most powerful master
Hibiscus
for more than
nodded with a
1,000
smile
years,
like a
the
flower.
old friend that
As
he
soon
had
as Yu
known for many
Qianzhou walked
years
into the big
was bidding
house,
farewell
he
to
saw
him.
Bai Changchun,
The
who was
past
sitting
was still
cross-legged
vivid
in
in
his
the center
mind.
with his eyes closed. Thinking back to the time when he
Nongzhu was
traveled
sitting on
through
the right
space
side
and
of Bai
time,
Changchun.
the originally blurry memories
She
and
stretched
the things
and
that
yawned.
he usually couldn't
Boy,
even
you
remember
are back.
suddenly appeared in front of his eyes.
I was going
as
to
if
look
it was
for you
only
on behalf
yesterday.
of your master.
He remembered that he
Master,
had tricked him to
Senior
come to
Nongzhu.
the demon ghost region.
Yu
But he had
Qianzhou
restrained the
bowed and
world's
sat
most
on the
powerful
left side of
master
Bai
for
Changchun,
1,000 years,
which was
opposite to Nongzhu.
He had shouldered the burden that
They
belonged
stared
to
at each
him. other, waiting for Bai Changchun to speak. He owed
No
it
one
to
knew
him.
what Bai Changchun was
See
thinking.
nearby. The house was quiet.
whimpered.
After
Her
a long
eyes were
time,
red,
Bai
and big
Changchun
drops
opened
of
his
tears
eyes.
fell down.
He looked at Yu
Her shoulders
Qianzhou and
trembled,
asked,
and she
"What is
covered
it that
her
you
mouth
came
as
back
she
for?"
sobbed.
Yu
She looked
Qianzhou
at the
was in
world's
awe,
most
but he
powerful
pretended
master
to be
with
generous
tears
in
in
her
her
eyes.
eyes.
This time, I
She
came
thought
back
about the
because
place
I have
he was
something
going
to
to
ask
and that
Master.
she would
never see him again.
He always remembered what Bai
She couldn't
Changchun
control
said
her
after
emotions.
he killed Healy.
Although she
Bai
had heard that
Changchun's
Senior Bai
evaluation
would go
of
to the
Healy was
East
too
Holy
polite.
Land one day.
He
She didn't
remembered
expect
it when
it
he
to
saw
be so
Bai
soon.
Changchun.
Therefore, had just
although
told her
he seemed to be
personally,
respectful,
Furong was
he
shocked.
did not dare to be too polite.
She didn't know what was going to
Before
happen,
Bai Changqun
but she suddenly
opened his
realized
mouth,
that the
Nongju
atmosphere was
asked,
not right.
"What is it?"
Tell me
was
about
crying,
and there was a sense of
curious
separation
look on his
between
face.
them. He
Nongju's
felt a little
lips
bored.
were tightly shut,
Yu
and she turned
Qianzhou
to look at
glanced
the
at Bai
crying
Changqun.
Seeing
Obviously,
that the old man
she
had
already
no
knew.
objection,
He looked at Nongju
he put his
and
hand
asked,
on Ziyi's
"Senior
shoulder,
Nongju,
stared
do you
at Bai
remember
Changqun,
and said with a smile,
"Him,
old Bai, you."
Nongju smiled
His
disapprovingly
voice was a
and
little
said,
hoarse,
"He is your
and his
sworn
throat
enemy."
was a little dry. Both of you went from the cultivation world of Wuxia
He couldn't
to
finish
the
his
cornucopia,
words,
and his face tightened.
If you didn't make him famous,
Yu
I
Qianzhou,
wouldn't care
who
who
knew
he
what
is.
was going on, didn't
Tilting
feel
his head
anything,
to look at
but
Bai
the atmosphere
Changqun,
made him
he
feel
explained,
uncomfortable.
"He's the new disciple of Bing
He stood at
Chengzi.
the side and scratched his head.
I've told you about him before."
Suddenly, he saw
He's the one
Furong's
who was
bewildered
forced
by your
expression.
disciple to hide all day
He
long.
immediately pushed Furong
How
lightly and
pitiful.
said,
"Master has
He then
always
turned his
favored
head
you."
to ask Yu Qianzhou,
Quickly
"What's
kowtowed
wrong?"
to Master.
"Are you
Furong's
fighting against each
expression
other
became
again?"
more and more confused.
"Hasn't he been defeated by you
She
all
didn't
the
know
time?
why she had to kowtow
Can't
for
you
no
defeat
reason.
him?"
You
However,
even asked your
she always
master.
listened to Yu Qianzhou's
You think
words
too highly of
unconditionally,
him,
don't you?
She immediately
What a
knelt
joke.
down and kowtowed to Bai
Who does he
Changqun.
think he is?
After 3
Why can't I
kowtows,
defeat
Bai
him?
Changqun waved his
Yu
hand.
Qianzhou
and
waved his
Furong
hand
couldn't
and said
continue
disdainfully,
kowtowing anymore.
"I happened to meet him before I
She
came
was
here.
lifted up by a gentle airflow
I seriously
without any
injured him and
resistance.
chopped off one of his arms."
Hibiscus looked at Yu Qianzhou
Unfortunately,
as if she wanted
he
to say
escaped.
something. "You are
Yu
so
Qianzhou
useless."
smiled at her, indicating
You
that it was
seriously
fine.
injured him and chopped off one of his
Nongju,
arms,
Shantian
but you let him
Island might
escape.
not be peaceful during this
Nongju
period of
sat
time.
up straight and asked excitedly,
"Bring Furong
"It
and
can't be so
to
simple.
the South Sea purple bamboo
What's going
forest
on?
for the time being?
Tell me. As for the
Yu
rest,
Qianzhou frowned and
will
said,
naturally
"I only
arrange
know
it."
what devil art that
Bai
fellow
Changqun
cultivates,
said with a
and it's
faint
incomparably
smile.
strange."
Furong looked
Actually,
at Yu Qianzhou
before I
again,
injured him
and
this
revealed
time,
a puzzled
I'd already
expression,
killed him
as if
once.
asking, "Why do you
But
want
the
me to
shocking
leave?"
thing is that he was
Yu
actually able to
Qianzhou
come
gave
back
her
to
a
life
look,
after being turned
indicating
into
that
a
she
dried
should listen
corpse,
to him.
and in the end,
Furong
Furong
escaped.
immediately didn't have any
Master,
objections.
have you ever heard of such
Old
an evil
Bai,
skill?
There's no need to be so
Come back
anxious.
to life.
Nongju
was
looked at
shocked
Yu
and
Qianzhou
looked at
and
Bai
said,
Changqun
"If I leave,
inquiringly. What will happen to him?"
Bai Changqun was also
"Leave
a
now,
little surprised.
don't make me say more."
He thought for a while
Bai
and said
Changqun
slowly,
looked at the boundless
"It said that there is a
1,000-mile
skill
lake,
that can bring
and
people
nodded
back to
slightly
life
as he
after
looked
death.
around.
But I
His
don't know
usually
what it
cold
is.
face actually maintained
But I
a
don't
faint
believe
smile.
that someone with a shallow cultivation
Occasionally,
who can defeat
a trace
you
of
can
reluctance
cultivate to
and
the
longing
realm
could
of
be
resurrection.
seen in his moving eyes,
That
but
realm
it
is
disappeared
close to
in
the
a flash.
divine sense.
After
I'm
looking
afraid
around,
that even the
his
masters in
expression
the immortal
suddenly
realm
became
can't
resolute,
do that.
and his eyes suddenly
really
looked towards the
incredible.
east.
Nongju
His bright
poked her
and
head
spirited
and asked
eyes
weakly,
revealed an
"Old Bai,
unswerving
why don't you
determination
catch
to
that
pursue
guy and kill him again? So that you can confirm it again? I can
Chapter
also see what kind of
704.
resurrection skill it is."
Nongju stood there for a long time
Qianzhou's
with a
eyes lit up
complicated
and thought
expression.
that it was a good idea.
Then, she walked
Bai
away
Changqun
resolutely,
glanced at them
threw out a
fiercely.
ship-shaped flying celestial
They shrunk their
device,
heads and
and
quickly
jumped on it.
extinguished their evil thoughts.
Nongju stood at the bow
They
of the
all
ship
knew
with
that
her
Bai
back to Bai
Changqun was
Changqun,
arrogant,
motionless and silent.
As long as no one
Yu
provoked him,
Qianzhou
he would
sighed
not fight
slightly
with
and
such
pushed
a junior.
Furong and Zi towards
Unless
the
Yan
flying
Juixing was a
celestial
very
device.
powerful master who could make
Furong
Bai
was at a
Changqun
loss,
have a strong
while
desire
Zi
to
kept
fight
looking
with him.
back with tears in her
But
eyes.
how could Bai Changqun take a
After
fancy
Yu
to a
Qianzhou
junior
half
who could
forcibly
even
put
defeat
them
Yu
on the
Qianzhou?
celestial device?
Nongju
finally
coughed
couldn't help
awkwardly
but
and
kneel
changed
down.
the topic. She leaned
She
on the
pointed
string
at
of
Yu
the ship and
Qianzhou
cried
and
bitterly,
scolded,
"Why are you
"Senior
looking
Bai,
at me like that?"
No matter how sad Zi
Maybe you
was
were
crying,
fooled by his
the
camouflage.
celestial device flew into the
Yu
sky with a
Qianzhou
whoosh.
was unhappy when he
Nongju
heard
didn't
that.
look back from beginning to end.
When he was about to refute,
She didn't
Nongju
even say a
changed
word.
her words and said,
She
"But
just
it is
stood
also
straight at the
possible
bow
that
of the
guy's
ship
devil
and drove
kung
the
fu is
celestial
magical.
device towards the south.
He doesn't
Yu
have to have a
Qianzhou
high
quietly walked
cultivation."
to Bai Changqun and said,
"Yes,
Master, they're gone."
that guy's evil skill is
He was
really
obviously
evil."
talking nonsense.
Yu Qianzhou looked at Bai
With Bai
Changqun and
Changqun's
nodded in
cultivation,
agreement.
how could he not know that
Bai
they're gone?
Changqun shook his head and
Bai
said,
Changqun
"Evil
looked
skill?"
back at Yu Qianzhou
What could truly be
expressionlessly
called
and nodded.
demonic arts were the cultivation
Qianzhou
methods
took
of the
a few
demonic
steps
cultivators
back,
in the
cupped his
ancient
hands
times,
and bowed to
which
him
were even more
solemnly.
ancient than the ancient
When he
times.
straightened up again,
But the
person in
devil
front of
realm
him
has
has
already
already
disappeared.
disappeared.
Countless years.
A black spot in the sky quickly
Until now,
disappeared
I've
towards
never
the
heard
heard of anyone practicing evil skill suddenly became very quiet. How could there be evil skill without any sign? Slowly turned around and looked around. The devil realm? The sun was still shining, the 1,000-mile lake was still sparkling, both of them wind was still blowing, and the grass and trees on the island were still lush and swaying. Isn't there only the immortal realm? When his eyes fell on the big house in the center of the island, he stopped. How come there is a devil realm? The old man who had been sitting in the house for thousands of years had really left. Why haven't I heard of the devil realm? This place belonged to him now. I haven't heard of it before either. He actually
when I
became
took
the
over the
master of
demon
this
realm,
place. The former torture
what an
envoy
incredible
mentioned it.
thing.
By
He was
Chang
now
Chun
the
sighed and said,
108th
"It's a
torture
horrible
master of the
existence.
demon ghost region.
It once dominated the three realms
suddenly
and
felt
even the immortal
suffocated.
realm and the underworld had
He
to bow
suddenly
their heads
turned
to
to
the
it.
east and shouted loudly,
Later,
"Master, the devil realm was sealed." His voice echoed
The
in
immortal
all
realm
directions.
and the underworld joined hands
He suddenly
to
ran
eradicate
to the
evil
lakeside,
cultivators
opened
in
his
the human
arms
realm.
and sang loudly towards
They
the
would rather
boundless
kill the
thousand-mile
wrong
people
lake.
than let them
The
go.
great river flows to the
So
east.
no one dared to mention the word
stars in
devil
the sky
realm
joined the
for
Big
fear
Dipper.
of being implicated.
We're leaving just like
Over
that.
time, the legend
You
about
have
the
it,
devil
I
realm
have it,
disappeared
we
in
have
the
it
human
all.
realm. Seeing
The evil
injustice on the
cultivators
road,
in the devil
he
realm
roared.
are so powerful.
When it's time to make a
Nongju
move,
swallowed and
make a
said,
move. Why haven't I heard you
Rushing
mention it
through the
before?
9 prefectures.
Bai Changchun glanced
Hey,
at Yu Qianzhou, who was in a daze.
Hey,
Nongju looked at him and immediately understood. It seemed that she had benefited from this guy. Before he could finish his song,
said it to
he
him.
ended it with a curse.
Bai Changchun looked out
After
of the
singing,
door and said
shouting,
leisurely,
and scolding,
in ancient times,
he finally felt
evil
a lot more
cultivators
comfortable
wreaked
in his
havoc
heart
and
formed their own way,
Yu
which was
Qianzhou
called
began
the
to
devil
calm
realm.
down.
There
He
was a
stood
top
silently
master
by
of
the
the
devil
side of
realm
the
who
1,000-mile
forcibly
lake
opened
and
up a
gazed into
fourth
the
realm
distance.
apart from the immortal realm, the underworld, and the
The
human
blush
realm,
on his cheeks
which was
gradually
called the
faded
devil
away
realm.
and returned to normal.
The cultivation
On a tall
of this top
magnolia
master
tree
of
not
the
far
devil
away,
realm was so
pure
powerful
white
that it
magnolia
made the
flowers
top
bloomed
masters of
all
the
over the
immortal
branches,
realm and the underworld
bathing in the
trembled.
sunlight and gently swayed.
In the end, he broke through
Lady
the known
Mu,
peak of
who was
cultivation
dressed in
the
snow-white
four realms
clothes,
and ascended
stood
to the
under the
legendary
tree
and
in a reserved
illusory
manner.
divine realm.
She looked
This
even more
person was
delicate than
recognized
Milan,
as the
who was
first
master of the
branch.
devil realm since the
Looking
beginning
at
of
the
the
lonely
devil
silhouette
realm.
by the lake,
He was called the
hesitated for a
devil
long
god
time
by the
before
later
walking
generations
over.
of the devil
He came
realm.
to the back of Yu Qianzhou and asked softly, "Mister, has the
Chapter
punishment
700
envoy left?
The
Will
devil
he come
god.
back?"
Nongju
His voice
and Yu
was
Qianzhou
trembling.
both murmured with
She
fascination.
clearly saw what happened here
A
just
magnificent
now.
scene appeared in their
She
minds,
saw what she
in
shouldn't
which a
have
peerless
seen,
genius
and
stood
heard what she
between
shouldn't
heaven
have
and
heard.
earth.
They
They
couldn't
couldn't
see
see
a
his
demon
face
king,
clearly,
so she
but the
was
wind
naturally
was
more
blowing,
sensible
the
than
heroes were
hibiscus.
chasing after the deer,
Although
and
she
the
didn't
demons
know
were
where
dancing
Bai
wildly,
Changchun was going,
but he was the
she
only
vaguely
one.
guessed that
Just
he
think
wouldn't
about
come
it.
back.
During that era where experts were
Yu
numerous like
Qianzhou
trees
snorted
in a
coldly.
forest, how could a peerless
His calm
genius
face,
who was able
which
to
was
look down
facing the
upon all
1,000-mile
experts,
lake,
shake the
instantly
three
changed
dimensions
and
with his
became
mind,
covered with a
and
layer of
forcefully
frost?
open up a world of his own?
A majestic,
How
gloomy,
could others not
and
be
terrifying
fascinated
aura
by him?
instantly erupted from his
Bai
upright
Changchun
body and
continued
directly
slowly.
enveloped Lady
It was
Mu.
also because he went to the divine
Endless
realm
coldness,
that the devil
endless
realm lost its
despair,
pillar.
endless death.
Many years later,
All kinds
the
of
devil
extremely
realm gradually
terrifying
declined,
negative
and
emotions
finally the
directly
immortal realm
impacted
and
the
Lady Mu's
underworld had
body
the
and mind.
opportunity to raise their heads,
Lady Mu
which led
almost
to the fate of
instantly
the
lost her
devil realm
desire
being
to
sealed.
live and was about to suffocate.
He sighed again and said,
Trembling
"It's a
all
pity
over,
that we were not
she
born at
directly
the right
knelt on the
time,
ground
and couldn't
swayed.
see the peerless glory of
Her
the
eyes
devil
were
god.
wide open, and she
If
looked
we
at
could
Yu
fight with
Qianzhou
him,
with
we
infinite
would die
fear.
without regret."
She had never imagined
These words
that the
caused
amiable
Nongju
Mr.
and
would
Yu
be so
Qianzhou to look at
terrifying.
each other and roll their
Just
eyes.
the powerful aura erupting
They muttered
from his
in their
body
hearts,
was terrifying
"Old fellow,
enough to kill
you're
her."
biting off more than you can
Just
chew.
how terrifying was the
Although you're
cultivation he was
formidable,
concealing.
you're still far behind the
She had
devil
never
god.
seen such a terrifying
The devil
aura in
god
her
is
life.
a master of the divine realm.
Today was the first time in
With
her
your
life
cultivation,
that the man in front of
are
her
you
suddenly
qualified
made
to
her
fight
feel
with
that
him?
he was even more
The
terrifying
room
than
was
the Lord
quiet,
Torture
and Bai
Envoy.
Changchun
Yu
still
Qianzhou
looked
leisurely
leisurely
turned
and
around and
fascinated.
stared at Lady Mu,
Yu
who was kneeling
Qianzhou
on the
secretly
ground.
glanced at him, and
He said
quietly counted
indifferently
his
with
fingers
no expression
repeatedly.
on his face. The
As a
Lord
disciple,
Torture Envoy
it was
has
not
left.
appropriate for him to
Do
criticize
you have any
his master
ideas?
for reaching beyond his
No.
grasp. Nongju
No.
suddenly coughed and smiled
I-
awkwardly. Old Bai,
I was just
the times
asking.
are different, and each
I was
has its
wrong.
own talent. I was wrong.
Speaking of which,
As the
Sir,
first master
please
in the
spare
world,
my life.
your status in the cultivation
Lady
world
Mu's
is
face
no
was
different
pale,
from that of the
but
devil
she forced
god.
herself not to collapse
Many
and
people
tried hard to
admire you,
reply.
so why do you admire the
She knew
ancients?
that she had asked something she
Ah.
shouldn't have.
It's a little
If
unrealistic.
she didn't explain
Let's
clearly,
think about the present
man
and
in
the
front of
future
her
could take her life at any
Bai
time.
Changchun shook his head slightly
It would be
and
as
said
easy as
firmly,
killing an
after
ant.
learning the legend of the devil
She didn't
god
need
from
to
the
doubt
former
him at
torture
all.
envoy. I often
From
look
today
up to the
onwards,
vast sky
I am
and have a
the new
goal
torture
to strive for in
envoy
my
of the
life.
demon domain.
I look forward
Yu
to one
Qianzhou
day
turned
learning from
around
the devil
and faced
god,
the
so that my
thousand-mile lake
cultivation
again.
will not be in vain. With his back facing Lady
Maybe
Mu,
you think I'm a
he
little
said,
ambitious,
"Do you have any
but I
objections?"
think it's not impossible.
Lady
because
Mu
the great
trembled
way
and
is
bowed with
endless.
difficulty. The scope of the old man's goal was too great. "I pay my respects to the
eyes
Lord
were focused
Torture
on
his
envoy.
nose. His nose
As
was
soon as
focused
she
on his
finished
heart.
speaking,
His eyes
she
were
suddenly
focused.
felt that the
He counted
terrifying
on his
aura
fingers
had
without
suddenly
saying
become
a word.
stronger.
Nongzhu couldn't help but murmur. It
You
was
won't
so
be able to
strong
see
that
the
she
devil
didn't even
god.
have the slightest thought of
Wait
resisting
until you
and
see the
directly
demonic
fainted.
monarch.
When she woke
the
up,
immortal emperor,
she found that
and
the
the
sun
emperor
was
of
still
hell.
high in the sky. Obviously,
I remember
she
now.
hadn't fainted for long. Yu Qianzhou suddenly raised his head and found that there was nothing wrong with her except for being a little weak. 10,000 demons, the number one sect in China's cultivation envoy had already spared her. His father, she tilted her head and found that Yu Qianzhou was still standing. His grandfather was the previous sect leader. She immediately got up and knelt down. Master, do you think that the 10,000 demons are related to the ancient devil Dao? Lady Mu, these are two completely unrelated matters. Yu Qianzhou turned around and chuckled. The current devil Dao and the ancient devil Dao are not the same thing. Into the lake, swimming the real devil Dao is quite complicated. Lady Mu was stunned. Human, ghost, she couldn't get used to the Lord classified as devil Dao. But she understood the reason why there were devil cultivators in ancient times. She immediately walked after the lakeside and gently those pioneers of cultivation had no standard cultivation methods, an alluring and delicate body. In order to survive in the savage and dangerous era, she slowly walked into the lake, no choice, and with a wave of all kinds of cultivation, she smoothed out a half-exposed rock on the lake surface. Because they were pioneers of cultivation, turned around no one gave them advice on lying directly on the rock. Therefore, half of his body was on the rock in the water, and while the other half was exposed and became possessed by the devil. Naked, Lady Mu leaned over and let him massage her slender fingers. Astray and became possessed by the devil were collectively called devil cultivators. They were the pioneers of the devil. His eyes and grunted. Among them, there were many to be enjoying it very much, and the devil god was the best. His mind was filled with all sorts of nonsense. Devil Dao and the 10,000 I don't have to be cautious in Shantian Island so that's how it is. I'm in charge of my territory. Suddenly realized. How great. Nongzhu clicked which was resting on his arm. I didn't expect that a group of people who went astray could suppress the people of the immortal world and the underworld to get some fresh fruits. That's really amazing. Use a little more stared at him and snorted. Yes. Even if they went astray and became Lady Mu didn't show any abnormality. Do you think those who can create their own cultivation methods are ordinary people? Which one of them is not sacrifice herself with a mind and talent beyond ordinary? Didn't seem to have any intention because of the danger in the wild. Except after Bai Changchun left, many people live in a precarious someone's territory. The cultivation methods created by these people are all created an unprecedented scene in the demon domain. Brutality, killing, sunbathing in the 1,000-mile lake and being in order to save their lives. There is nothing they don't dare to do. After the big house in the devil Dao island silently watched the lively scene by the Nongzhu nodded slowly and the open door seemed to be letting out a soundless roar. It was only in that kind of precarious in the territory of the Wuxia so many amazing talents the flames of war reached the sky. If it were now, wherever who would dare to risk their lives to practice the army was invincible. There is no ready-made cultivation didn't even have the strength to fight back. Now I finally understand why countless amazing legends that can't be replicated always appear in that played a triumphant song all the way. They attacked cities and conquered territories, but it turns out that they were taking something out of their pocket, and the territory they occupied kept expanding. What a group of people! The imperial court no wonder they can suppress the immortal world and the underworld. Yu Qianzhou forcefully recruited able-bodied men to replenish the army that was constantly losing. If a person wasn't forced into a dead end, the shrinking territory, how many of them would risk their lives and take a risk out of desperation? The empire was on the verge of collapse. This is similar to the saying in his previous life that heroes are born in troubled rotten regime. The various in a peaceful environment, there are not so many heroes. Coldly from the sidelines. Bai Changchun looked at They were somewhat curious as to why the Wuxia came to me to hadn't taken any action yet. Yu Qianzhou could it be that they were just going to let the imperial power change in the secular world? Seeing that his master and Nongzhu were staring at him, when the news that Sherwin scratched his head and said with an embarrassed smile, the various sects came to a sudden was about to open. So I came back to ask Master if you really want to go there. The Wuxia island had no choice but to swallow their indifferently and said, I have contacted ancestor Nan Island became the joke of the various sections. In a few days, I will go to Shen unceremoniously settle down temporarily and wait for the East Holy Land to open. They were finally going to drink the bitter wine that also became solemn. However, she stared at Yu Qianzhou and quickly shifted away. Your master was about to ask me to call you back. No one cared about the war in the secular world. I didn't expect you to come back in advance. This was because a piece of news suddenly spread from the various countries for you everywhere. Moreover, Yu Qianzhou asked like wildfire, Master, can't I not go? It was hard for the Wuxia he knew clearly that once Bai Changchun left, his life would not be so good. The number one expert in the world, Bai Changchun nodded in agreement was going to enter the mysterious East Holy Land. Old Bai, think about it again. Since the news had spread, the ins and outs of the matter were quickly investigated. Has already extended your lifespan. The various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world finally understood that the number one expert in the world was from Wuxia. It's not impossible for you to break through again. he had been secretly protecting. Why do you want to go to that place of no return? Therefore, the soul formation experts of the various countries hadn't made a move. She raised her hand and pointed at Yu Qianzhou once by Changchun once you leave, the various countries will definitely launch an all-out attack. He has offended so many people. World. There are a lot of people who want to kill him. The various sects in Wuxia panicked. Yu Qianzhou nodded honestly. They knew that their good days were coming to an end. Yes. At this moment, the various countries were forcefully restraining their disciples. Changchun said calmly, even if you and I ordered them not to cause any trouble, it is not certain that anyone can kill him. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. Yu Qianzhou was stunned. This was because by Changchun's temper was very scary. Aren't you mocking me? At this critical moment of his departure, looked up and down it was possible that he would swiftly reorganize the cultivation world by dealing with the aftermath. Changchun would not lie. This was not just a rumor. There must be a reason for him to say such a thing. It was very possible. By Whenever something involved by Changchun, I heard from Nongzhu the commotion caused would make everyone tremble in fear. You had a close relationship with a white fox who had been cultivating no one wanted to provoke by Changchun at this moment. You also wrote several songs for a moment. The entire cultivation world had a rare peace. Nongzhu was a little confused. Everyone was polite and lived in harmony. When she knew that Yu Qianzhou, however, the scum of the cultivation world, that was not peaceful, was accepted as within the borders of Lingfang Valley. She told the disciples about the story of this scum together with the thousands of Wen clan disciples. It had been a long time, spent a few days. She didn't know why by Changchun brought it up Valley several times. Yu Qianzhou was stunned. He almost turned over every barren mountain and remote corner. He thought it was not a secret. To Lu Yanqing, so he nodded and admitted Xian Laosan and Yan Zhuixing. That's right, stolen the 7-star blood orchid and seemed to have disappeared. I'll tell you one thing, and you'll understand. Not even a trace of them. Many years ago, I comprehended a set of incantations somewhere in the cultivation world of Wuxia. Chapter 7. I accidentally hit a treasure from a deep mountain. Both Lu Yanqing after I carefully examined it, I understood what Xian Laosan had probably escaped. For this thing to fall into my hands, even if they didn't escape, might be the will they couldn't find them under such a large-scale search. When I was hesitating whether to rely on myself or the treasure, a white fox who had been cultivating for 1,000 years suddenly rushed in. He led the disciples of attracted by the movement of my cultivation to continue searching frantically. Looking back on my life of everyone could understand I always relied on myself. 3 of his brothers there was no need to rely on one treasures. Of them might even die. At that time, how could he not I made up my mind to abandon the treasure and watched it. 2 figures stood in front of the cliff under the setting sun. When I accepted you as a disciple, I was just curious about your abnormality. The lush Lingfang Valley was dyed with a layer of red and yellow by the setting sun. Later, for the next few days, the relationship Lu Yanqing and the white fox that Nongzhu told looking at the deserted I immediately guessed that the thing in the white fox's hands was in your hand. When Lanfeng sighed softly, if this isn't God's will, since it's already happened, what is? Let's get over it. I didn't expect that the thing that I didn't want would come to me in a roundabout way. 8th and 9th are all anxious. Moreover, it appeared at the right time. I'm useless as a master. Yu Qianzhou, I can't even understand what I'm talking about under my nose. Nongzhu was confused. If it wasn't she interrupted for the eldest, first and second, what are you talking about? 8th going out to collect her. By Changchun's words were very obvious. Lu Yanqing shook her head in pain. Not know what he was talking about. When Lanfeng comforted her, he was naturally referring to the golden bead. Who knew that after Yan Zhuixing escaped from cornucopia, he would hide that the old man already knew that he had the golden bead. Otherwise, he would have attracted from what he said, of people he to seemed to know down. The use of the golden bead. How could we allow him to cause trouble here? I really didn't mean to. It's all my fault. Yu Qianzhou immediately got up and knelt down. If I didn't stop Yu Qianzhou he was a little panicked. There wouldn't be today. This old man couldn't tolerate. Do you remember what Yu Qianzhou said at that time? He was even prepared to run away. You let the people of Ice Palace go today. Waved his hand and said, if the people of Ice Palace hurt Lingfang Valley in the future, it's right not to say I hope you won't regret it. Don't mention it to anyone in the future. She looked back at when Lanfeng you will need it for many things in the future. Said, it's really a prophecy. I can also go to the Eastern Holy Land with peace of mind he was right. Because of it. When Lanfeng, if the heavens have feelings, you think I deserve the heavens will also grow when old. Lanfeng was startled. This is God's will. That's not true. Hearing this, don't listen to that guiding heart finally calmed down. Speaking of Yu Qianzhou, he then asked Lu Yanqing seemed to have thought of something. What is this thing called? Her self-reproachful expression became a little more restrained. By Changchun and she said in a bleak tone, I reckon that Lao San is no longer in the Lingfang Valley. Said slowly, let your Wen since you don't disciples withdraw. Then don't ask anymore. By Changchun is when about the time to leave, comes, and many people are rushing to see him off. This is God's will. You should also go and see him off. You don't need to ask anyone. Let's keep looking. Do you understand? If you don't look for it, then there's no hope of finding it. Chapter 7. When Lanfeng tactfully refused, it would be strange if he could understand it. He also wanted to take this opportunity to accompany Lu Yanqing. In fact, seeing that Lu Yanqing still wanted to persuade him, he couldn't help but smile and
he
said,
deserved to be
everyone
killed
knows
by
what those
lightning in
people
his
who are going
previous
to send
life.
Bai Changchun off are thinking.
He was depressed at the thought of it.
They just want to personally see
However,
Bai Changchun
it was strange
enter the
that the
eastern
golden
sacred
bead
land
that Bai
so that they
Suzhen
can
gave
plan
him
belong
belonged
to
to
Bai
Bai
Changchun. Otherwise,
After
they
it
won't
fell
be
into
able
his
to
hands,
eat or sleep.
he became
Bai Changchun's disciple. It
I
was
won't
really
join
a
in
big
the circle,
fun, lest Bai Changchun
Nongzhu felt that
she had missed something wonderful.
Lu Yanqing paused for a
She
moment
asked
and nodded
anxiously,
slightly.
"What treasure are you talking
As
about?"
the two of them chatted,
Tell
they
me
began
about
to
it.
guess who would succeed
Bai
as the demon
Changchun
realm's
glanced
torture
at her and
master.
said,
Under
"Don't
the
ask
night
about
sky,
things that you
in the
shouldn't
vast
know."
land of Di Rong Kingdom,
Nongzhu's
there were
face fell
undulating
immediately.
mountains.
She
Some
said
were
in a
steep,
muffled voice,
some were tall,
"Old
and
Bai,
some were
you are
flat.
not a good friend."
Under the cover of the
Why
white
are you
snow,
still hiding
they
it
had
from
lost
me
their
when you've
edges
already
and
said
corners,
so much?
forming a gentle and
Bai
beautiful
Changchun
white
ignored
curve.
her and said quietly,
The bright
"After
moonlight
I leave,
reflected off
the
the
demon
pure
realm
white
needs
snow,
the next torture
forming
envoy."
a silver light all over the
Hearing
mountain.
this, the room suddenly
This was a
became
world
quiet.
of snow, and the
Yu
cultivation
Qianzhou
world
began
called
to
this
count
place
his
the
fingers
Great
again.
Snow Mountain. To be honest,
On the highest
he was
peak
not
of the
interested
towering
in the
mountain,
torture
a
envoy of
majestic
the demon
palace
realm
made
at
of
all.
ice stood tall.
It seemed that the
Under the
responsibility
moonlight,
was
the
more
ice
important
palace
than
was
the
sparkling,
benefits.
showing off its cold
Nongzhu
and
was no
poignant
longer
beauty on the
angry.
peak of the mountain.
She turned her head
And this
casually
seemingly
and
cold
looked out
ice
of the
palace,
door. In fact,
she
was
murmured,
loose on the outside,
"The weather
but
outside
tense on
seems
the
good."
inside. Yu Qianzhou,
The
from
6
today
disciples
on,
of Bing
I will hand over
Chengzi
the
were
demon
carefully
realm to
watching
you.
the outside of the
Bai
palace,
Changchun
and
third
said
exile
bluntly,
was
without
among
any
them.
beating around the bush.
Yan Bugui anxiously
Nongzhu
paced
was
back
stunned
and
for a
forth
moment,
in the palace,
and then let out a sigh of relief.
He was able to come here thanks
She
to the
cupped
two
one
disciples
hand and the
of
other
Bing
before her
Chengzi,
chest to
a
Yu
group of
Qianzhou,
disciples of the
whose
ice
face
palace,
was full of
and a
astonishment,
group of old
and jokingly
subordinates who
said,
risked their
"Yu
lives to
Qianzhou
escort him out of the
congratulations."
limitless island.
Congratulations
However,
on
the
finally
moment he
becoming
arrived
the
here,
world-famous
he
torture master
coincidentally
of the
saw
demon
Yan
region.
Zhuixing, who was personally
Yu
escorted
Qianzhou
by
came
Bing
to himself
Chengzi.
and waved his hands repeatedly.
It was a good thing for a father and son
"Master,
to meet each
I
other.
can't do it.
But Yan Zhuixing's
I
appearance
really
really
can't do
shocked
it."
Yan Bugui.
"You'd better give it to
His
someone
son
else."
looked haggard and had lost an
Bai
arm,
Changchun
which
said with a
instantly
blank
made Yan
face,
Bugui's
"Oh,
heart feel
who do
like
you
it
think
was
is
being
suitable?"
cut by a knife.
"Him.
He had nothing
Yu
now.
Qianzhou pointed at
His
Nongzhu
home was
without
gone,
hesitation.
and the limitless island was gone.
There were only 3 people
If
here.
his son was gone,
He
if
really
he did not
didn't
drag
know where to
Nongzhu
go.
down with him, who else
Bing
would he
Chengzi
drag?
had brought Yan
Yu
Zhuixing into the
Qianzhou
secret
said
room for
eloquently,
3 whole
Senior
days,
Nongzhu's
and there was no
cultivation
news
is higher
at all.
than mine, and she has
How
many
could he not
friends
be
in the
anxious?
cultivation world. Below the ice
If there is
palace,
any trouble,
in the secret
she can
room
find
deep
many
inside
people
the
to
mountain,
help her.
It was covered by a
I can't
soundproof
do that.
enchantment. I have a
At
lot
this
of enemies
moment,
to begin
inside
with,
the
and
soundproof
I have a lot of
enchantment,
problems to
the
deal
smell
with.
of blood was so strong
I
that
don't
it was
have the
pungent,
time to manage
and there
the
was an
devil
endless
domain.
mournful scream, which
The
made
burden
one's
is
hair
too heavy
stand
for
on
me
end.
to bear. Bing
Bullshit.
Chengzi looked at Yan Zhuixing,
Nongzhu
who was
immediately
in a small
jumped
blood
up,
pool in
pointed
front of
at
him
Yu
with a
Qianzhou's
solemn nose
face.
and scolded, "Don't
The one who
involve
was
me in the
screaming
matter
was
between
none
you
other
two,
than Yan
or don't
Zhuixing
blame me for
himself."
being rude." Yan
Yu
Zhuixing's
Qianzhou
naked
gritted
body
his
was
teeth.
soaked in the blood pool. If
And
it
the
wasn't
blood
for
had
Bai
submerged
Changchun
up to his
he would
chest.
have scolded him back.
He was crazily shaking his head
Changchun
and
gently
screaming in the
waved his
blood
hand
pool.
and said, "Nongzhu,
His face
you go
was
out
hideous,
first," and he seemed to be in
"I need to
extreme
talk
pain.
to him alone."
At the place
Nongzhu
where one of his
rolled her
arms was
eyes
cut
and
off,
sat down.
more than half of his arm had already grown out.
She said with a smile,
"Old Bai, you really have
At
a
the
lot
place
of
where his
secrets."
arm was cut off,
What
there were
secrets
red
do you
granules
have?
wriggling disgustingly,
Let me listen
like
to
a
them.
pile of earthworms,
I
which
promise
was
I won't
disgusting to
disturb
look
you
at.
too.
He was using the blood
I'll only
demon
bring
body
my ears
refining
and not my
technique
mouth
to regrow his lost
You
arm,
change your
even
face
though Bing
faster than
Chengzi
turning
had
the
a
page
firm
of a
mind.
book.
After listening to
What a
Yan
fickle villain.
Zhuixing's mournful scream for
Yu
a whole
Qianzhou
day,
pointed
he
at the
couldn't help
mulberry
but
tree
frown.
and scolded the locust tree.
However,
for Yan
Nongzhu's
Zhuixing's
expression
safety,
didn't
he had
change.
to protect him personally.
She kept her mouth
He
shut
really
and
couldn't
let him
let any
scold her with a
accidents happen
smile.
to him. She had
Speaking
entered the
of
state
which,
of only
he
bringing
had to
her
thank
ears
Bai
and not her
Changchun for
mouth.
successfully saving Yan
Who would have
Zhuixing
thought
this
that Bai
time?
Changchun would only say
If
a
it wasn't
few
for Bai
words,
Changchun
and he would
going to the
immediately
East
flee
Holy
in
Land
defeat.
and keeping all the forces
Bai
quiet,
Changchun said,
it would have been
"Some
really
secrets
difficult
can
for him
only
to
be told to the
successfully
next
bring Yan
torture envoy
Zhuixing
of the
back."
devil domain."
After receiving
If
the
you
distress
really want to
message
hear
from
it,
Yan
I'll take it
Zhuixing,
that you
who was
agree to
forced
be the
into a
next
corner,
torture envoy.
he rushed over at top speed.
Watching Nongzhu leave,
Coincidentally,
Yu Qianzhou
the
suddenly
Spirit
became
Fang
listless.
Valley was conducting a large-scale search of the
waved
mountain.
his hand,
And the
the
soundproof
seriously
bounded
injured
domain
Yan
was
Zhuixing
instantly
was
formed.
hiding here and there,
Nongzhu
not
wandered
knowing where
outside
to
the room
hide.
for a while. Bing Cheng's
She knew that it
timely
was
appearance
impossible for her
to
crisis.
eavesdrop under by Chang Chun's
With his
nose
profound
with her cultivation. He quietly brought
She waved
Yan
her
Zhuixing
hand and
back.
walked out.
In fact,
But when she
Yan
saw
Zhuixing
Ziyi
chatting with Hibiscus by 1,000-mile
capture,
she suddenly became
if it
worried.
wasn't for third
Although she didn't
Xiaofan's
want to be the
familiarity
torture
with the
envoy
terrain
of
of
the
the
Devil
Spirit
Domain,
Fang Valley
for
and helping
Ziyi's
Yan
sake,
Zhuixing
she didn't
hold
want
on
until
until
Bing
Bingcheng
Cheng to be the torture
arrived.
envoy.
He would still be in trouble.
If the news that Yu Qianzhou was in charge of the Devil Domain was
still
spread
had
out,
to thank one
the Devil
person,
Domain
and
would
that was when
definitely
Lan
become the
Feng.
target of public criticism.
Fortunately,
when Lanfeng
because
only
Yu
cared
Qianzhou's
about
cultivation was too weak to deter those with ulterior
If when
motives.
Lanfeng had also participated
the vast
in the
devil
search
domain
of the mountain,
would probably
Bing
become a hot
Chengzi's
spot
movements
for
would
all
probably
forces
not
to
have
compete
escaped
for.
when Lanfeng's notice.
Yu Qianzhou's fate
All
was
these
worrying.
coincidences could only mean
Without
that
Bai
Yan
Changchun's
Zhuixing was not
deterrence,
fated to
those
die.
experts at the late stage
A day
of Huashan
later,
realm
the
would be
scream
like
in the
wild
secret
horses
rooms
running
disappeared.
wild in the cultivation world.
In the blood pool, Yan
Few
Zhuixing,
people in the world
who was
could
covered in
restrain
blood,
them, opened his healthy
Nongzhu
arms and
admitted
laughed
that she couldn't
wildly
stop
without
them with her
concealment.
cultivation.
After
The
calming
only
down,
way was to
Yan
ask when
Zhuixing
Lanfeng
vowed
to
to
take
take
charge,
Chengzi and
but
said,
this was not
"Thank
a
you for
long-term
saving
solution,
me, master."
What was Bai
Otherwise,
Changchun thinking?
Zhuixing would not have been
He
able
actually
to escape.
dared to give such a heavy
You should have
responsibility
used the
of the
protective
devil
jade
domain
pendant
to
I gave you
Qianzhou.
earlier. Wasn't
Why
he
did
afraid
you have
that
to
Yu
use it
Qianzhou
only
would
when you
mess
had
it
no
up
other
and even
choice?
lose his life? Bing Chengzi
This was
casually
simply harming
scolded him and did not say much.
Nongzhu shook her head in confusion,
But then he slightly frowned
she
and
remembered
said,
what
"Your
Bai Changchun
cultivation
said before.
Why did
Why
Yu
did it
Qianzhou
drop?
really have a life-saving
Although the
magic
blood
weapon?
demon body refining
Logically
technique has
speaking,
the magical
Bai
function of
Changchun was
reattaching
not a
broken
person who
limbs,
made rash
it
decisions.
also causes great damage
There
to the
must be a
cultivation.
reason for him to do so.
It is expected that my
Thinking of
cultivation
this,
would drop from the
Nongzhu
middle
was
stage
more or
of
less
crossing
confident.
calamity to the early stage.
Even so, he kept walking around the island, anxiously waiting for the result of the conversation between the master and the disciple in the center of the island. Yan Zhuixing suddenly opened his arms and roared conversation between the master and the disciple would break down and Bai Changchun Unfortunately,
would not leave. Yu Qianzhou
that
could
would
not
be the
hear
best
this
result.
sentence. Otherwise,
It
he
should
would
be known
definitely
that
jump
once
up
Bai
and say,
Changchun left,
"Who's afraid
the
of
world
who?"
would be in chaos. The sun went from high in the sky to the west,
because he did
and
not
then from the
expect
west
Yan
to the
Zhuixing
night, to let him go.
Until the night was full
Since
of
they were
stars
sworn
and the bright
enemies,
moon was
he
in
would
the sky,
continue to fight
there was
to
no
the death.
movement in the room.
In the big house of the
Nongzhu
demon
didn't know
ghost
what the
region,
master
Yu
and the
Qianzhou
disciple
was
were talking
lying
about
about
for such a long
but there was
time.
an elastic thigh under his
Furlong
head,
and
which
Zi
belonged to
were
Miss
also
Mu.
a little impatient.
At this time,
They
Miss
asked
Mu was
Nongzhu
carrying
several
a plate
times,
of red fruits,
but Nongzhu
picking
just
them one by
answered
one and
perfunctorily.
sending them to Yu Qianzhou's mouth.
So the two girls returned to
The
the
latter
lake,
smacked
back
his lips
to
a
back,
few times,
and stayed up for
waved
the
his
night.
hand to
When
stop
the sun
hands
shone
that
from
continued
east
to send
again,
him red
the
fruits,
conversation
and got
between
up
the
with a
master
sigh.
and the disciple in the room
He
came
leaned
to an
against the
end.
door frame weakly.
Yu
spat out
Qianzhou
the
didn't
fruit
know
skin,
when he moved to
and
the
looked
opposite
around
side of Bai
aimlessly.
Changchun.
He was really
The
bored
master
out
and
of
the
his
disciple
wits.
talked face to
He
face
had
for
no
nearly a whole
choice.
day. Yu Qianzhou
Although there
sat
were beauties
quietly
serving
in
him
him
in
his
his
life was
digesting the
comfortable. There
secrets
were
that
only two
belonged to the
people on
former
the island.
torturers.
After
Bai
a few
Changchun
days,
said a
he
lot
found
during
that
the
he was
day's
bored out of his
conversation,
mind.
and Yu Qianzhou also
As a
asked
new
a lot
official,
of questions.
he also wanted to guard the
Bai
demon ghost
Changchun
region
answered all his
majestically like
questions.
Bai Changchun and have a
The more
taste
he
of being
knew,
a torture
the more
envoy.
serious Yu Qianzhou
But
looked.
now he found that it was a
He
mistake
didn't
to learn
expect
from
that
Bai
the devil
Changchun.
domain had so many secrets.
Bai Changchun
That's
could
right,
stay here
master.
year after year, but he
Yu
found that he
Qianzhou
lost
suddenly
his
raised his
after
head and
only
said,
a few days.
"There's something I forgot to ask,
How was
master.
this different from being in jail?
I once followed the flame
In
eye
jail,
of Twilight
many of
Valley's
his
blue
cellmates
fire
would brag,
underground,
but
and
Miss
saw a
Mu
few
was not one to
inconceivable
brag.
things.
I
Bai
wonder if
Changchun
master has
froze.
left.
There's
Yu
something
Qianzhou
under the
leaned
flame
against
eye of
the
the
door
blue
frame
fire
like a resentful woman
What
and
did you
muttered
see?
to himself, then
Even
disappeared.
master doesn't know.
Yu
Teleportation.
Qianzhou found this rather
Miss Mu's
strange,
expression
and then
turned
he
serious.
gestured with his hand.
The new torture
Below
envoy
that is a
had
massive
indeed
underground
concealed his
space
cultivation
flowing
with
on
lava.
purpose.
It's an
He was not
extremely
as
superficial
spectacular
as
sight.
he usually appeared.
Several
but had hidden
massive
his
blue
strength
lotuses grew on the river of
In the
lava,
vast East
and
Sea,
Twilight
there was an
Valley's blue
island
fire
named
came from these
Xianxian.
lotuses.
It was the
Most
territory of
inconceivable
Nanming
of all was
ancestor,
that there was a
one of the
naked
four
child
great
sleeping
men
on
of the
one of the
cultivation
lotuses,
world.
not the slightest
It
bit
was
afraid
shrouded
of
in
the blue
smoke
fire.
all year round, and
Bai
the red
Changchun
light shone
stroked his
without
beard
end,
and said,
and the
"You
sound
mean
of
to say
knocking
that the
could be
child
heard.
was sleeping naked in the
On the
blue
main
fire?"
peak of Xianxian Island,
Yes,
Bai Changchun,
there's
dressed
something
in a
even
green
more
robe,
inconceivable
stood
than
alone
that.
with his hands behind his
Yu
back.
Qianzhou clicked his tongue.
His eyes were slightly closed
At the time,
on his thin
I
face.
struck the child awake.
He
But
was
who
waiting
knew that
quietly,
the child would
waiting
jump straight
for the
into the
opening
roiling
of the East
lava
Holy
as if he
Land.
were swimming
Suddenly,
in a river.
he opened his eyes
Because I
and
struck
slowly
him,
turned
the
around.
child dived into the lava
He frowned
and found
said,
a helper.
"What are you doing here?" The helper he found
A
was
person
too frightening.
suddenly appeared behind him.
It was a savage,
At this
majestic,
moment, he
and
was
dignified
frozen on the
dragon.
spot like a fossil,
Damn,
not moving at
this
all.
is the first time in my life
Even
that
his
I've seen a
eyeballs
living
could not
dragon
move.
A
This
dragon?
person was none other than Yu Qianzhou suddenly stood up and gravely
After finding
asked,
his master's
"Are you sure you
location,
didn't see wrong?"
he had just appeared,
and
really
before
was
he
a
could
dragon.
react, he immediately
Yu
discovered that the
Qianzhou also
surrounding
stood
air
up and
currents had
gestured at
suddenly
the dragon's
moved.
appearance.
They pressed down
It
on
should have
him
been a
like
dragon,
metal,
making
and a red
him
one
unable
at
to
that.
move.
Its
He
entire
did not
body
even
was
have a
covered
chance
in
to
bright
resist.
red scales, and I could
This was
sense the
because by
majestic and
Changchun
ancient
had
aura
discovered it
the moment
early.
it appeared. Otherwise, if someone had
But
suddenly
strangely,
appeared behind him,
I seemed to
and
see
he
that
did not
the dragon's
stop in
claws
time,
were locked
Yu
down by
Qianzhou might have
dazzling
become
golden
a meat
chains,
patty, and the chains seemed to be connected to the bottom of the lava. The air
I don't know
currents
if I
that
saw
clamped
wrong,
down on him
but who
loosened,
would have the
and Yu
ability to lock
Qianzhou
down a
regained his
dragon?
freedom. I was scared out of my wits and didn't dare to look further. I'm here to send you off. Miraculous effect of the golden bead. Why did you attack me? He was full of resentment, and it felt like his kindness was taken as malicious intent. Didn't you say that the dragon mount of the myriad swords demon lord was red? However, he did not think about it. Could that dragon be the one that belonged to the myriad swords demon without being discovered? Bai Changchun he had suddenly appeared out of thin air in Utopia and got close to Bai Changchun. I didn't expect the legend to be true. Had subconsciously treated him as an expert and reacted immediately. The previous torture envoy mentioned he had stopped in time and did not cause any mishaps. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten about it. Bai Changchun had never wasted his breath on such topics. There are two theories, and he could not be bothered to explain. The premise is that the myriad swords demon lord was severely injured. Is this the miraculous effect? The first theory is that the myriad swords demon lord knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he gave the dragon its freedom, and the dragon's sword into the sky. Chapter 706. This matter was too mysterious. Master. Yu Qianzhou's face was full of pride. Could the second theory be that the dragon was locked underground, right? The second theory doesn't make sense. Slightly and turned around expressionlessly. The first as if he had no interest in what happened would know where the dragon was. This immediately dampened Yu Qianzhou's enthusiasm. Now if anyone knew that the golden bead had such a magical function, but he deliberately hid it and passed it down as a legend. Who would be as indifferent as him? Bai Changchun explained, this theory is also because the myriad swords demon lord from the south couldn't hold on any longer, and the hazy red fog that enveloped the island slowly drifted to the north. He knew that the dragon was no match behind Bai Changchun, so he locked it deep underground. The fog dispersed. At the same time, he told the dragon his vision gradually became clear, and the appearance when of the someone has the ability to break the shackles he placed on the dragon and release it. Master, that person will be the fated person who has the ability to avenge the myriad swords demon lord. The dragon will then come out and help the fated person to avenge the myriad swords demon lord. Yu Qianzhou's pupils shrank. That doesn't make sense. Bai Changchun was facing the east, rubbed his chin, and there was a vast expanse of white fog. How could others know about the conversation between the myriad swords demon lord and the dragon? No one knew how big those the area who knew about it were either there at the time, compared to the myriad swords demon lord passed on the Xian Island was probably the former is more likely. Otherwise, the two were separated by the swords demon and the distance would have no reason to tell others about the agreement between him and the dragon. The wind blew away the surrounding fog. There's no need to speculate anymore. But it couldn't blow away the vast sea of fog in front of it. It was ethereal, since you've already seen the dragon and mysterious. It means that the second theory is true. Holy land. I didn't expect Yu Qianzhou murmured. The dragon has always been underground once again in the demon domain, keeping its promise down with the myriad swords demon lord and waiting for the fated person. Followed his gaze and saw two figures rushing over. I really don't know how it survived in the blink of an eye. They arrived at the top of the mountain. When one of them saw Yu Qianzhou, he and Yu Qianzhou spoke at the same time. Yu Qianzhou sighed endlessly. This person was divine dragons were locked underground not for hundreds he made arrangements for Ze but for tens of thousands of years. He immediately rushed over here. Who could say for sure after how many years had passed since they didn't reply and turned their heads, but it was probably more than 100,000 years. The man standing next to Nongju was sizing about being locked up for so many years. Yu Qianzhou was also attracted by his weird costume. Just as he was shaking his head with his master, it was a tall, barefooted old man, and he said excitedly, his face was old, but his body was muscular and his skin was bronze. His face was full of whiskers. We're both abiding by the agreement straight up like a hedgehog of 10,000 swords. What was even more spectacular was that his hair, beard, and eyebrows were all crimson red. A god-tier expert. He was only wearing a pair of large divine dragon guarding the devil domain. Were also who in the world would dare to do anything? He had the appearance of a strange person. The old man opened his big eyes and looked at Yu Qianzhou curiously. Even he admired his own cleverness for coming up with such a good idea. I don't think I've seen him before. He couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. He looks unfamiliar. Bai Changchun looked at him speechlessly. It was hard to associate his disciples' expression with that of a good person beside Bai Changchun and speak. He then said coldly, it's true that the divine dragon's cultivation is high, and he immediately suspected that he was Bai Changchun's disciple. The divine dragon is also a member of the divine beasts. Said, Old man Nan Ming, just because it has the word divine, doesn't mean it's a god-tier expert. His words immediately confirmed sinister laughter stopped abruptly, and his expression bowed and said, Junior Yu Qianzhou, you mean that the divine dragon isn't necessarily very powerful? Nan Ming ancestor was stunned for a moment. Then it's not that it's not powerful, I knew it, but the so-called divine beasts are beasts with supernatural powers. No wonder they have innate advantages that other beasts can't compare discovered. After cultivation, they all have the possibility of reaching the unusually humble.
As for other beasts, it's not so easy to reach the god tier.
It's alright.
The divine dragon's cultivation definitely hasn't reached the god tier.
Now that I've seen you today,
you should know
really
that the
live up to
demon
your
lord of
reputation.
10,000 swords didn't even
He was
reach
a little
the god
tired.
tier when he died.
Why couldn't he
Think
see
about
through
it.
his cultivation?
How could he control a god tier dragon?
Nongzhu also felt that it
if
was
the
a little
divine
strange.
dragon really reached the god
With
tier,
Yu Qianzhou's
the
cultivation,
demon lord of 10,000
he shouldn't be able to
swords
hide
have
from the
died
protection
with the
of
divine dragon
Xian
protecting
Island,
him,
right?
Even with the
Nan
myriad
Ming
swords
ancestor
demon
was a
monarch's
straightforward
cultivation,
person.
he wouldn't be able to trap
couldn't
the divine
figure it
dragon
out,
underground
so he couldn't
for
help
so
but
many
ask,
years.
Yu Qianzhou,
I'm
what's your
afraid that the
cultivation?
divine dragon has already
I'm a little
broken free
clumsy
from
to
its
not be
shackles
able to
and
see
escaped.
through your cultivation.
Even if its cultivation
Nongzhu
hasn't
chuckled
reached
and
the
thought,
god level,
it would be strange
it's
if
probably
you could
many
see through
times
it.
stronger than the experts
Even
in the
by
cultivation
Changchun
world,
couldn't see
right?
through it.
Yu Qianzhou
said
rolled
weakly.
his eyes at him. Judging from
He
his
then
tone,
took out a
he seemed to
porcelain
be
bottle
unwilling
from
to
his
give
storage
up. Bag and respectfully
It seemed
gave
like
to
he
Nan
really
Ming
wanted to get a
ancestor.
divine dragon to protect
He
him.
said, "I've just arrived
By
here,
Changchun
so I
nodded
didn't
slightly
prepare
and
anything
said,
because
the
I came
masters
in a
of the
hurry.
cultivation world
Here
definitely
is a
can't
bottle
be
of
compared
breath
to the
concealing
divine
pill
dragon
that I personally refined. After taking one, you can hide your cultivation for 10 days. I have no respect for you. It's just a breath-concealing pill, so please accept it." Nan Ming ancestor revealed an expression of understanding. At the same time, he was very satisfied with this kid who gave him a gift as soon as he met him. He then reached out to take it and said, "Then I won't stand on ceremony. If you have time, come to Xian Island to play." Although breath-concealing pill wasn't a miraculous pill, it was a rare item that had long been lost. With a bottle in hand, it might come in handy in the future. Naturally, he had to accept it. Nongzhu, who was at the side, was unhappy. She pulled a long face and said in a deep voice, "You promised to give me a bottle, but you haven't given it to me yet. Are you going to drag it until?" Before he could finish, Yu Qianzhou threw a porcelain bottle at him and stopped him from talking nonsense. Nan Ming ancestor raised his red eyebrows. He could tell that these two guys didn't get along. Coincidentally, he and Nongzhu didn't get along well either. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." He immediately laughed and patted Yu Qianzhou's shoulder, praising, "Not bad, not bad." Half of Yu Qianzhou's body trembled from the slap, but he still squeezed out an awkward smile and said, "Senior, you flatter me, you flatter me." Bai Changchun quietly faced the vast sea of fog, turning a deaf ear to the conversation between the three. 100 miles away from Xian Island, there were more than 10 large flying artifacts floating in the sky and sea. These flying magic tools were all soul formation stage lords from various countries. There were more than 100 of them, and they were all gathered together in their respective circles. For example, Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and O Yangda were all there. The blue sky and white clouds floated, and the blue sea surged. The scenery was really good. However, everyone's attention wasn't on this. Most of the time, they were focused on the vast sea of fog between the blue sea and blue sky. However, they didn't see any movement until now. O Yangda, who was standing side by side with Pei Fong and Qi Jiujuan, suddenly turned around and walked away. He flicked his sleeves and said, "When is this damn East Holy Land going to open? We've waited for more than 10 days, why is there still no movement?" Pei Fong squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. He hugged his stomach and laughed, "Old Ouyang, don't be impatient. Isn't Bai Changchun already at Xian Island? Since he's here, it means that the East Holy Land is going to open soon." Qi Jiujuan turned around expressionlessly and said, "We've already waited for so many years, why would we care about waiting for a few more days?" He had always been like this. No matter what, there was almost no expression on his face. Although the three of them had been together for a long time, their temperaments and personalities had never been affected by one another. Pei Fong always had a smile on his face. The other two didn't talk much, but O Yangda's temper was a little fiery, and Qi Jiujuan's thoughts were always hard to guess. He was always cold and calm. There was no one else on the flying artifact that the three demigod final stage experts were on. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many people qualified to stand with them.
If they weren't summoned by them, how many people would be able to participate in the conversation between the three of them? The former top 10 experts were now incomplete. Of course, Bai Changchun was an exception, because the situation was just the opposite. It wasn't that Bai Changchun wasn't qualified to talk to the three of them, but the three of them weren't qualified to talk to Bai Changchun. As for the others, when Lan Feng and Bing Chengzi didn't come. The one who came, Hu Changshou, was standing with a group of demigod mid-stage lords with a gloomy face. However, he didn't seem to have anything in common with them, so it was very awkward. Look at how ugly Hu Changshou's face is. Pei Fong glanced at them and laughed. The other two looked over as well, and they snorted disdainfully. At this moment, the 100 or so spirit-severing lords all turned around to look at the source of the voice. They saw a dense group of flying artifacts coming from behind. Everyone looked at each other. Someone asked curiously, "Why are there so many people? Who's here to join in the fun?" Everyone was confused. Obviously, they didn't know. However, when those flying artifacts got closer, the demigod lords were speechless. There were at least 300 to 400 flying artifacts, and the cultivation of the people standing on them was too low for them to look at. The highest cultivation was at the end of the tribulation passing stage, and there were many at the tribulation passing stage. There were also many at the nascent soul stage. Everyone looked at each other and asked each other which sect they were from, but they all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't know them. Suddenly, someone said in surprise, "Look at their clothes. They seem to be from the Wuxia cultivation world." On one of the artifacts, Yunnan Tian, who was dressed in a snow-white fluffy robe, walked to the back of the ship and asked indifferently, "Who are you? Come forward and answer me." Although his voice was soft, it penetrated the group of people who were dozens of meters away. Those people seemed to stop when they saw the people here. They all looked surprised because no one could see the cultivation of any of the people on the flying artifacts in front of them. When they heard the question, they gathered again. When they were about 10 meters away, a flying artifact appeared with 5 to 6 people on it. It was the people from Fuxian Island. Feng Xiangtian walked to the front of the ship and forced himself to calm down. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. I'm here to send off Senior Bai. May I know who you are?" He had already vaguely guessed who these people were. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid, but he was the sect leader of the #1 sect in Wuxia. How could he show weakness in front of everyone? As soon as he finished speaking, the lords of the various countries burst into laughter, all of them shaking their heads with mocking expressions. The hundreds of people didn't care about the thousands of people standing in front of them at all. Someone even insulted, "They really don't know what's good for them. How dare they come here to die?" The elegant Yunnan Tian looked back at the person who spoke and realized that it was Yan Ji from Shishui country. He sneered, "Yan Ji, if you really have the ability, why don't you go out and kill them all now? It's a piece of cake to kill them." Yan Ji was suddenly stunned. Then, he flew into a rage and said, "Yunnan Tian, what do you mean?" Yunnan Tian said with a faint smile, "I don't mean anything. I just want to fulfill your wish. If you don't dare to, don't say such shameless words. You." Yan Ji wanted to say something but was stopped by Hua Zongming and the others. Bai Changchun hadn't left yet. If Yan Ji started killing the people of Wuxia cultivation world now, Bai Changchun would probably start killing soon. Chapter 707. Yunnan Tian ignored Yan Ji and turned to Feng Xiangtian with a smile. "So you're Wuxia cultivators, please go ahead." He didn't introduce himself and everyone else, as he didn't want to waste time talking. After all, the difference in cultivation was too big. The so-called supporting Immortal Island sect leader wasn't even worth mentioning in his eyes. But then again, with his identity, he was already very cultured to speak so politely to Feng Xiangtian. Although he didn't say everyone's identity, Feng Xiangtian and the others already knew. Especially when the two of them were arguing just now, Yunantian and Yan Ji's names made the Wuxia cultivators' hearts jump. These were the names of the Soul Formation realm lords of the various countries. Then I won't disturb you all. Feng Xiangtian didn't dare to show any temper. He cupped his hands at Yunantian and the others respectfully. He led the group of people and turned, wanting to go around these terrifying people. The various countries' lords looked at these Wuxia cultivators who were trembling like chickens and sneered. It wasn't convenient to touch them now, but once Bai Changchun went to the East Holy Land, these people would undoubtedly be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They wouldn't be able to run even if they wanted to. Hua Zongming, who was holding Yan Ji, looked at the Wuxia cultivators floating away in front of him expressionlessly. However, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw that there were several women standing on one of the flying artifacts. One of them was a woman dressed in white. She was a rare beauty in this world. He couldn't help but shout, "Stop!" The various countries' lords all looked at Hua Zongming. Yan Ji, who was beside him, was even more confused. This guy told him that now wasn't the time to cause trouble, so why did he start again? The Wuxia cultivators all stopped in fear. The leading flying artifact from supporting Immortal Island floated back. Feng Xiangtian braced himself and asked Hua Zongming, "May I know what advice this senior has for us?" He had no choice but to stand up for Hua Zongming. After all, he was the sect master of the number 1 sect. Hua Zongming, who was wearing light yellow thin clothes and barefooted, waved his hand in an elegant manner and said, "It's none of your business." His eyes were fixed on the beautiful woman in the crowd. Everyone followed his gaze and suddenly came to a realization. He must have seen a stunning beauty. No wonder. It must be known that Hua Zongming was a person who was famous for his love for beauties. His Great Light Palace was called a den of lust behind his back because he kept many beautiful women. It wasn't hard to guess what he liked by looking at his clothes that didn't fit his style. In fact, it wasn't just Hua Zongming. Many people's eyes lit up when they saw that woman. That woman was none other than the leader of the Moon Clan, Xianghua Fairy. She was famous for her looks in the cultivation world of Wuxia. This was also because Bai Hua Fairy wasn't here, otherwise a pair of beauties would definitely be a feast for the eyes. Jade Flower Fairy's expression changed slightly. She naturally noticed Hua Zongming's lecherous gaze, and he was not the only one. Although she was angry, she was even more terrified because she couldn't afford to offend anyone here. He could only tilt his head to the side and pretend that he didn't see anything. The reason why the Wuxia cultivators were here was naturally because they heard that Bai Changchun was going to the Eastern Holy Land. Therefore, the leaders of the various sects contacted each other and came together to see him off, to thank Bai Changchun for protecting the Wuxia cultivation world for so many years. Of course, this was just a nice thing to say. The main reason was that every torture master of the Ghost region was a top expert who could shake the cultivation world. The next torture master would probably be no worse. The hundreds of sect leaders had come here and put on such a grand show because they wanted to show respect to Senior Bai. Or rather, they wanted to play the pity card, hoping that Senior Bai could speak to the next enforcer and continue to protect the world of cultivators in Wuxia. According to their thinking, since Bai Changchun could take care of the Wuxia cultivation world for so many years, it was obvious that he had deep feelings for the Wuxia cultivation world. They believed that if they came together to beg him, he wouldn't really ignore them. Therefore, this scene happened. However, their thinking was just wishful thinking. Bai Changchun didn't take care of the Wuxia cultivation world like they thought. First of all, when they saw Bai Changchun later, it was still uncertain whether he would talk to them or not. Second, once Bai Changchun left, it would be difficult for them to leave this place safely. Jade Flower Fairy had just turned her head to one side when a white figure suddenly appeared in front of her. She was a little surprised, but then she saw clearly who it was. It was the elegant man in a fluffy white robe who talked to Feng Xiangtian just now. He was looking at her deeply. Jade Flower Fairy was suddenly at a loss. She couldn't scold him, let alone beat him. Sorry to disturb you, Fairy. Yunnan Tian bowed politely and said, I am Yunnan Tian, the Lord of Lu Nangua. It is my honor to meet you today. I wonder if I have the honor to know your name? Jade Flower Fairy bit her lips and bowed, I am Jade Flower, the leader of the Moon Clan. Nice to meet you, Senior. Hua Zhongming's face darkened. He didn't expect that Yunnan Tian would take advantage of him after he stopped these people. Among the lords, many people were already snickering. They all knew that Yunnan Tian was not a good guy. There was a reason why he only accepted female disciples in his clan. Those who knew the truth all knew that the relationship between Yunnan Tian and the female disciples he accepted was not clear. It was just that, apart from cultivators at the last stage of the semi-god realm, Yunanshan's cultivation was considered high compared to the other lords. Everyone gave him some face and few people talked nonsense. Yunnan Tian really doesn't change. Pei Fong smiled at Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangde, who were beside him. He then shouted loudly, Brother Yu, calm down for the time being. If there is anything, we can talk about it later. Please come over and have a chat. He did not want Yunnan Tian to cause any trouble now, lest everyone was implicated. Yunnan Tian glanced at Pei Fong and bowed to Jade Flower Fairy. Oh, the famous Jade Flower Fairy. Nice to meet you. I will talk to you again when I have the chance. After that, he stepped back and teleported to the flying ritual implement where Pei Fong was. He glared at Pei Fong and said grumpily, What's the matter? Pei Fong shouted to the people of the Wuxia cultivation world, Let's go. Don't make trouble for yourselves. As soon as he spoke, no one stopped the Wuxia cultivators. A group of people quickly flew away. At this time, Pei Fong turned to Yunnan Tian and said with a smile, Brother Yu, in terms of appearance, who in the world can compare to Lu Yanqing? As soon as these words came out, many people couldn't help but burst into laughter. Everyone knew that Yunnan Tian had once pursued Lu Yanqing. Unfortunately, he was beaten up by his rival in love, Wen Lanfeng, and almost lost his life. From then on, Yunnan Tian didn't dare to provoke Lu Yanqing anymore. Pei Fong was obviously exposing his shortcomings. Yunnan Tian snorted coldly and flashed back to his original position. At this moment, everyone's laughter stopped abruptly and they looked around. The whistling sound of the wind gradually became louder, and the blowing sea breeze suddenly became stronger. The strange thing was that this wind wasn't from the north, south, east, or west. It was a little messy, and it became more and more vigorous. When it blew on their faces, it felt like something was slapping their faces. The blue sea below lost its rhythm and gradually became turbulent. Just as everyone was looking at each other in dismay, they suddenly heard the faint rumbling of thunder coming from all around them. Everyone quickly looked around and saw dark clouds coming from the horizon. They came from all directions and seemed to be gathering in this direction. Under the dark clouds, ferocious thunderbolts, dragons, snakes, and flood dragons were shining brightly. They connected the sea and the dark clouds in the sky and were moving quickly. The wind became stronger and was close to a storm. The sea was completely angry and set off monstrous waves. The East Holy Land is about to open. Pei Fong said with a smile on his face. What he meant was that Bai Changchun was finally leaving. Ouyangde and Qi Jiujuan nodded slightly. Many people present had seen the opening of the East Holy Land. They all understood that this was a sign of the opening of the East Holy Land. However, none of the Wuxia cultivators had seen it before. Just as they were dozens of miles away from the feudal lords, they suddenly saw such a change in the sky and sea. All of them looked around in bewilderment. The fog that had just shrouded Xian Island was blown away again. Bai Changchun, who was standing on the peak of the mountain, slowly opened his eyes and looked around with radiance. Nongzhu looked at the dark clouds in the sky and muttered to herself, "Is it going to open soon?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded solemnly and said, "Soon." He had lived on Xian Island for such a long time and had seen the opening of the East Holy Land several times. What he said was naturally correct. When Yu Qianzhou heard this, he looked around curiously. He wanted to see how the Holy Land of the East would be opened. Right at this moment, the thunderbolts in the surrounding dark clouds suddenly disappeared at the same time. The wind between heaven and earth swept wildly, and the surrounding dark clouds quickly gathered together. In less than an hour, the entire sky above Xian Island was covered by dark clouds. The last ray of light disappeared, and the world was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Not long after, thunder rumbled in the sky again, and it was getting more and more intense. The dark clouds in the sky flickered, as if they were brewing something. Suddenly, an intense and dazzling thunderbolt pierced through the dark clouds like a long sword and illuminated the entire world. The dark sky was shrouded by the rolling dark clouds, and the turbulent sea reflected the strong light. Then, a loud bang was heard. It was so loud that even the ground could feel the strong tremors. Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth and felt that he couldn't hear anything. However, his eyes were still wide open as he looked at the place where the thunderbolt struck. It was the clouds that shrouded the East Holy Land. No matter how strong the wind was, in the instant that the huge thunderbolt disappeared into the clouds, the world returned to darkness. However, Yu Qianzhou could faintly see that the moment the light disappeared, the unmoving cloud seemed to move. Chapter 708. Bang! With a loud explosion, another huge thunderbolt appeared in the dark clouds. The direction it struck was exactly where the previous thunderbolt struck. With the help of the strong light, one could see that the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land, which could not be blown away by the wind, were slowly surging. Before the dazzling light disappeared, another shocking thunderbolt struck at the same location. Once the three thunderbolts appeared, it was as if a fuse had been lit. In an instant, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. Densely packed green electric snakes flashed in the dark clouds and interweaved like a net. The scene was extremely shocking. Under the lightning, Xian Island was completely lit up. The surrounding sea surface was filled with billowing green light. At this moment, the dark clouds in the sky shouldn't be called dark clouds, but lightning clouds. They were formed by dense lightning. Countless densely packed lightning bolts shot towards the sky above Xian Island and converged into a gigantic thunderbolt. Bang! Once again, the target was the same as the previous three lightning bolts. Yu Qianzhou's eyes widened as he personally saw the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land rotating slowly. Suddenly, as if the speed of rotation was too slow, earth-shattering explosions resounded. Countless lightning snakes gathered to form huge thunderbolts. They crazily struck out one after another. More and more of them appeared, and the frequency of the strikes also became denser and denser. This scene reminded Yu Qianzhou of a dozen heavy machine guns bombarding the same target. Other than the continuous loud explosion, nothing else could be heard. The dark clouds had turned into a world of thunder and lightning. The lightning shot out wildly, and everywhere was covered in a vast expanse of green. The four people on the main peak of Xian Island could clearly feel the entire mountain beneath their feet shaking. Rocks of all sizes on the mountain were rolling down the mountain. This was because they were not ordinary people. Their cultivation was not weak and they could circulate their energy to resist the tremors. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died from the tremors. Yu Qianzhou, whose cultivation was inferior, had already used his fingers to block his ears. Otherwise, he would not have been able to bear it. Even so, he still felt a little dizzy. He felt that his surroundings were filled with electromagnetism. All the hair on his body stood on end, as if there was an electric current flowing on the surface of his body. Although the Wuxia cultivators who were dozens of kilometers away were already very far away, they could still imagine the shocking scene in that place. All of them were dumbfounded as they looked at the shocking scene in the distance. Suddenly, someone noticed that hundreds of figures were flying towards the place where the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The lords of the various countries had already kept their flying artifacts and were flying over quickly. They gathered at a spot several miles away from Xian Island and hovered in the air. Looking at the might of the world before them, even though this was not the first time they had seen it, they still felt their hearts tremble. In that instant, they felt how insignificant they were. In the face of the might of heaven and earth, no matter how high his cultivation was, he was nothing more than an ant in this world. The continuous thunderbolts continued for nearly an hour before they finally calmed down. The wind between the sea and the sky was getting fiercer and fiercer. That was because a huge whirlpool had formed in the sky where the lightning struck. It produced a powerful suction force and stirred up the surrounding airflow. Bai Changchun, Grandmaster Nanming, and Nongzhu were like nails nailed to the mountain peak, not moving an inch. On the other hand, Yu Qianzhou was dumbfounded. He could not withstand it with his cultivation. He lost his center of gravity due to the strong wind. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he felt like he was about to float away with the wind. Nongzhu looked at his bewildered expression and laughed sinisterly. At this moment, Grandmaster Nanming's bear-like palm pressed on Yu Qianzhou's shoulder. A warm current flowed into Yu Qianzhou's body, and he immediately stood firmly on the spot like a stake. Yu Qianzhou finally relaxed and could enjoy the scenery with peace of mind. The dense lightning in the dark clouds gradually died out, and the last ray of light between the heavens and the earth disappeared as well. Once again, they were plunged into complete darkness. All that was left in the surroundings was the strong wind blowing ceaselessly. However, Yu Qianzhou could clearly feel that the strong wind was slowly rising into the sky. The sound of the surging waves seemed to be gradually calming down, and it was no longer as impatient. At this moment, Grandmaster Nanming withdrew his palm from Yu Qianzhou's shoulder. Yu Qianzhou stretched out his hand to feel up and down in the darkness. The wind was indeed much weaker, and the whistling sound reached the sky. Ouch! Yu Qianzhou cried out in pain. In the darkness, Nongzhu said angrily, "Yu Qianzhou, is there something wrong with you? How dare you touch my butt?" Yu Qianzhou hurriedly explained, "Don't misunderstand, I don't have that kind of hobby. I really didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind, and I accidentally touched you." Amidst their whispers, Grandmaster Nanming's laughter could be heard. "Wah! Old man Nanming, you!" Nongzhu screamed as her but was pinched by someone. "Don't misunderstand. I didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind," Grandmaster Nanming snickered. Amidst the crackling noises, Nanming ancestors' blood-curdling screams could be heard. Nongzhu roared in anger, "King, feel the wind, is it something you pinched with your hands?" Yu Qianzhou quickly moved away to avoid being affected by the two people. Not long after, a bright white light appeared in the surrounding horizon, and it was expanding rapidly. The dark clouds in the sky were shrinking rapidly. In less than an hour, light once again shone on this part of the sea. The eastern sacred land was originally shrouded in white fog, but now, a black whirlpool appeared in the sky. It sucked in the dark clouds that were as thick as ink, like a tornado pillar. The area of the dark clouds in the sky became smaller and smaller, and they were gradually swallowed by the black whirlpool. After a while, the last piece of dark cloud was sucked in by the whirlpool. The sky returned to being bright and sunny, and the blue waves of the sea rippled normally. The only difference was that above the eastern sacred land, in the whirlpool that was dozens of meters wide, a dense electric web suddenly appeared. It was like a huge beast opening its fangs to devour. After more than 300 years, the eastern sacred land has finally opened. Grandmaster Nanming let out a long sigh. Yu Qianzhou turned his head and saw that his red hair and red beard had become messy as if someone had pulled them. Needless to say, it was definitely done by the furious Nongzhu. There were also many footprints on the buttocks of his red underpants. He reckoned that Nongzhu had something to do with them. Yu Qianzhou didn't have the mood to pay too much attention to this. He looked at the whirlpool that gathered lightning and said in a daze, "This whirlpool is the entrance to the Eastern Sacred Land?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded and said, "That's right. An entrance with no exit can only be maintained for a period of time. After 6 hours, it will automatically close and return to normal. If you want to enter again, you have to wait for the next opening in 300 years. The three of them looked at Bai Changchun at the same time. They saw Bai Changchun, who was standing with his hands behind his back, slowly turn around and stare behind him expressionlessly. The three of them followed his gaze and immediately noticed the group of people several miles away. The cultivation of that group of people wasn't weak. They immediately noticed Bai Changchun looking at them, and they looked at each other guiltily. Pei Fang's fat face twitched, and he smiled awkwardly at the crowd. "Bai Changchun is leaving, let's send him off." With him in the lead, more than 100 people quickly flew over. The space at the top of the main peak was limited, and it couldn't accommodate more than 100 people. Furthermore, they didn't dare to stand together with Bai Changchun, so they all landed at the foot of the main peak. All of them sneaked glances at Bai Changchun, but to their surprise, they realized that Yu Qianzhou was actually standing next to Bai Changchun. Grandmaster Nanming and Nongzhu were still acceptable, but that guy had such a big responsibility. What right did he have to stand next to Bai Changchun? Yu Qianzhou stared at the group of soul-forming experts below him, and he felt very pleased. The feeling of looking down at a group of soul-forming experts from a high position was very, very satisfying. Pei Fang cupped his broken palm and said with a smile, "We learned that Brother Bai is leaving, so we specially came to send you off. Nanming, Nongzhu, you're here too. Yo! Brother Yu Qianzhou is here too." Bai Changchun's sharp gaze swept across the people below, and finally, he stared at Pei Fang. He said lightly, "Pei Fang, are you the leader?" His indifferent words immediately scared Pei Fang so much that cold sweat broke out on his back. There were too many meanings in his words, and it was easy for people to misunderstand. Pei Fang's expression changed, and he immediately waved his hand and said, No, we all agreed to come together. We thought that you were going to leave, so we all thought that we should send you off." As he said this, he turned around and asked the people behind him, "What do you think, everyone?" Yes. 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 We should send him off. The group of people replied meekly. None of them dared to raise their voices. Looking at the situation, the people standing at the front couldn't wait to shrink back even more. Now this was majestic. He could scare a group of soul-forming experts like grandchildren. Yu Qianzhou's eyes lit up, and he looked at Bai Changchun with great admiration. Nongzhu, an ancestor of Nanming, looked at each other and shook their heads slightly. Bai Changchun's despotic power had suppressed everyone for too long, causing everyone to be afraid to the bone. One wrong look from him could immediately make a group of people tremble with fear. "In that case, should I thank you for your kindness?" Bai Changchun asked lightly. No need. Pei Fang squeezed out a smile on his fat face, and he waved his hand repeatedly and said, "We've all been in the cultivation world for so many years. It's only right for us to send you off, it's only right." At this moment, Bai Changchun suddenly looked far away. Everyone followed his gaze and saw a group of densely packed flying artifacts carrying a group of people flying over quickly. It was the group of people from the cultivation world of Wuxia. Led by Feng Xiangtian of Fuxian Island, hundreds of sect masters gathered. The closer they got to Xian Island, the faster their hearts beat. The legendary number 1 expert in the world should be in front, but no one had seen him before. When everyone got closer and saw the group of lords on the main peak, they couldn't help but look at the 4 people standing on the peak. To be able to make the lords of the soul-forming realm submit to them, they were naturally extraordinary. Among them, there must be the legendary number 1 expert in the world. Chapter 709. Yu Qianzhou was slightly stunned. There were many familiar faces among this group of people from Wuxia. He muttered to himself, "Why are these people here to join in the fun? This isn't a place for you to join in the fun. You can't afford to play." A group of flying artifacts stopped tens of meters away. The feudal lord standing on the second peak stared at these people coldly. The Wuxia cultivators sized up the 4 people standing on the peak anxiously. Many of them were stunned because one of them was very eye-catching. It was hard not to recognize him. The group of people was speechless. Why is Yu Qianzhou here? Moreover, he was standing high above the feudal lords. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were puzzled when they saw Yu Qianzhou here. Although the Wuxia cultivators didn't recognize Bai Changchun, the temperament of the 4 people was obvious. There was no need to mention Yu Qianzhou. The red-haired, red-bearded, bare-chested old man and the handsome middle-aged man didn't match the image of the world's number 1 expert in the legends. Only the green-robed old man had a thin face, and his eyes were filled with a supercilious indifference. He stood there motionlessly, yet he gave off a feeling that he was one with the world. He was probably the number 1 person in the world in the legends. Yu Qianzhou stared coldly at Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. He sneered and said, "Sect leader Feng, it's been a long time. I wonder why you're here." Feng Xiangtian was a sect leader, so he wasn't someone who didn't know the severity of the situation. Since Yu Qianzhou could stand here and speak first, he was already not someone Fuxian Island could afford to offend. He didn't care about his reputation anymore. He had to drink the bitter wine he brewed himself. He squeezed out a smile and cupped his hands. Our Wuxia cultivators have been protected by Elder Bai for many years. Today, we heard that Elder Bai is going to the East Holy Land. Wuxia's 373 sect leaders came to send you off as a token of our goodwill. May I know which one is Elder Bai? Please allow us to thank you. The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Even Yu Qianzhou didn't expect nearly 400 sect leaders to come from Wuxia's cultivation world. Didn't that mean all the sects were here? What were these people trying to do? They were here to see Bai Changchun, so Yu Qianzhou couldn't say anything. However, Bai Changchun didn't say anything either. It was as if he hadn't heard anything. At that moment, a flying artifact flew out from the Wuxia's formation, attracting everyone's attention. Yu Qianzhou took a casual glance and immediately recognized them. They were people from the 4 great clans. The 4 clan leaders stood at the front of the flying artifact. The rest of the Chinese cultivation world didn't know Bai Changchun, but the 4 great families' patriarchs had seen him before. Now that the patriarch was in front of them, they naturally had to come out and greet him. Bai Shouji, a descendant of the Bai family, greets the ancestor. Bai Shouji knelt on the flying magic tool in front of everyone with an emotional expression. The 2 Bai clan elders behind him also lifted their long robes in excitement and knelt down to pay their respects. The ancestor's name shook the world. As a descendant, he felt honored. Wu clan, Jing clan, and Tan clan's juniors greet ancestor. The 3 clan leaders and 2 clan elders each knelt. Putting aside the other 3 clans, just Bai Shouji's words alone had shocked everyone. His surname was Bai, and he called Bai Changchun old ancestor. Didn't that mean? Other than Yu Qianzhou and Nongzhu, who were in the know, everyone else, including Nanming old ancestor, were shocked speechless. Especially those from Wuxia's cultivation world, they were all dumbfounded. At that moment, someone vaguely remembered that the 4 clans once had a very powerful figure. However, it was just a rumor without any proof. They didn't expect it to be the world's number 1 expert, Bai Changchun. Everyone's gaze moved back and forth between the 4 clans and Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 clans and sighed. What are you doing here? There was a rare softness in his tone. No matter how ruthless he was, the 4 families in front of him were still his descendants. Now that he was leaving, his future was uncertain. Perhaps after this farewell, he would never have the chance to meet them again. Once Bai Changchun spoke, everyone's guess about the 4 clans became certain. They were really Bai Changchun's descendants. Oh my! He was Bai Changchun. The Wuxia cultivators first looked at Bai Changchun with great respect. Then, they looked at the 4 clans with complicated expressions. All of them cursed in their hearts. The 4 clans hid themselves too well. They had such a powerful backer, but they never revealed it. No wonder the 4 clans always advanced and retreated together. They were a family that wore the same pants. What's more, the sects that had conflicts with the 4 clans and had evil designs on the 4 clans were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Bai Shoji, who was kowtowing, stood up and said excitedly, "Ancestor, I heard that you are going to the Holy East Land. How can the descendants of the 4 clans not come to send you off? Otherwise, we will be scolded by our descendants as unfilial descendants. Please don't be angry, Ancestor. Please forgive us." "Forget it." Bai Changchun raised his hand at the 4 clans and said, "Get up." "Thank you, Ancestor." The 4 clans kowtowed and stood up. They looked at Bai Changchun excitedly. Apart from the 4 clan heads, the other 6 clan elders had never seen Bai Changchun before. Originally, some of the 6 elders had doubts about the 4 clan heads going to the Demon Ghost region to see Bai Changchun. Now, all their doubts were gone. All that was left was excitement. Ancestors might shook the world. He was truly the world's #1 expert. This glory was enough for future generations to praise and be proud of. "Yu Qianqiu." Bai Changchun suddenly called out. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thought that Bai Changchun wouldn't reveal their master-disciple relationship in front of everyone. However, since he had called out to him in front of everyone, it was time to announce their relationship. He immediately bowed and said, "Disciple is here." "Ah! He is." The surroundings immediately became chaotic, and a wave of exclamations rang out. Everyone was stunned and looked at Bai Changchun and Yu Qianqiu in disbelief. These 2 are actually master and disciple? Oh my God! Many of the feudal lords were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Almost everyone had a part in hunting down Yu Qianqiu. Fortunately, that kid was lucky. If something really happened to him, it would be a big joke. Who was Bai Changchun? There was no need to doubt what would happen to him. Many people cursed Yu Qianqiu's 18 generations of ancestors in their hearts. He was forced to such a point, yet he still didn't reveal his backer. Even if he wanted to die, he didn't need to drag them down with him. Thank goodness, thank goodness, thank goodness this brat is still alive and kicking. The expressions of the soul formation stage feudal lords were rich and colorful. Now many people finally understood. No wonder this kid was always hanging out with Nongzhu, no wonder when Lanfeng began to support this kid after returning from the demon domain, no wonder this kid dared to run amok in the cultivation world and was not afraid of anything. It turned out that he had Bai Changchun behind him. No wonder he was qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun now. The people of the Wuxia cultivation world all stared at Yu Qianqiu with complicated and fiery expressions. His background was too powerful. When this truth was announced, it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone. All of them were stunned. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 major families and said slowly, "If the 4 families live their lives according to their own will, if they encounter any trouble in the future, they don't seek to live forever and don't seek to be illustrious. As long as it's within your ability, there's no need to force it. You can be a little more considerate. This can also be considered as fulfilling the relationship between me and the 4 families." Yu Qianqiu didn't give any guarantee. He just cupped his hands and said indifferently, "Rest assured, Master. This disciple will remember." Bai Changchun nodded slightly and waved to the four families. There's nothing for you to do here. Go back quickly and live your own lives. The four families looked at each other. They were here to send off their ancestor. Now that the ancestor hadn't been sent off, how could they go back? Seeing that the four wanted to say something, Yu Qianzhou glanced at the Soul Formation stage feudal lords and said sternly, "For family heads, don't say anything more. Listen to Master's arrangements and go back immediately. Don't make Master angry. Otherwise, you will all be unfilial descendants." At this point, the four families didn't dare to disobey their ancestor. They all knelt again and said, "Yes, ancestor. Farewell, ancestor." Then, they stood up and flew around the various sects on their flying Dharma artifact. Under the envious gazes of the sects, they quickly flew back to Wuxia. At this time, there was a commotion among the sects in Wuxia. They must have secretly sent the same message. They all bowed to Bai Changchun and said, "Greetings, Senior Bai." Yu Qianzhou looked at these people speechlessly. He didn't know what they wanted to do. But at this time, he was suddenly stunned. Among the people bowing, there were four women in white standing on a flying Dharma artifact behind the people from Fuxian Island. Two of them bowed and the other two stood straight. They didn't bow. They were very eye-catching in the crowd. Yu Qianzhou knew the person in the lead. It was the Moon Clan master, Jade Flower Fairy. Jade Flower Fairy was biting her lips and staring at them. Hua Rui, who was standing beside her, was also looking at them in astonishment. Yu Qianzhou guessed what they were looking at. He tilted his head and was slightly stunned. Suddenly, he understood everything. They were looking at none other than the elegant island master of the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest, the famous Mr. Nongzhu. Nongzhu also looked at Jade Flower Fairy with a dumbfounded expression. He probably didn't expect to meet Jade Flower Fairy on Xianxian Island. The man and the woman finally met each other. Yu Qianzhou immediately lowered his head and laughed. He wanted to find a chance to drag Jade Flower Fairy to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest to discuss Nongzhu. Now it seemed that there was no need at all. He didn't need to think about being the bad guy anymore. He just needed to watch the show. Seeing him laughing like this, Bai Changchun and the Nanming Patriarch looked at him with questioning eyes. When Yu Qianzhou noticed their eyes, he immediately felt that he had lost his composure. He coughed and straightened his expression. First, he sent a voice transmission to Bai Changchun, "Master, the beautiful woman standing at the front is Zi's mother." Then, as if wanting the world to be in chaos, he sent a telepathic message to Grandmaster Nanming, "Senior Nanming, the beautiful woman standing at the very front is an old flame that Senior Nongzhu secretly dumped. We haven't seen her for many years. Don't tell others that I said it." Chapter 710. Bai Changchun was already looking at Ziyi's mother. Ancestor Nanming asked in disbelief, "Nongzhu's lover? Really? You're not lying to me, are you?" "Senior Nanming, what are you talking about? I'm famous for my credibility. Everyone in the cultivation world knows that. I've never lied in my life. That woman is the leader of the Moon Clan of Wuxia. People call her Fairy Qianghua. If you don't believe me, you can ask Senior Nongzhu. I promise I'm telling the truth. But don't tell him I said it, or he'll fight me to the death." "Okay. I know. Fairy Qianghua, the leader of the Moon Clan of Wuxia?" Ancestor Nanming tilted his head and looked at Nongzhu. Seeing her dumbfounded look, he immediately believed Yu Qianzhou's words. He rolled his eyes and shouted at Fairy Qianghua, "Is that the leader of the Moon Clan, Fairy Qianghua?" His words shocked everyone. Everyone looked at Ancestor Nanming, wondering how he knew Fairy Qianghua. Because of Yu Nantian and Hua Zongming's mistakes, the feudal lords of the various countries immediately let their imaginations run wild. Could it be that the Nanming old ancestor had also taken a fancy to this woman? Fairy Qianghua turned a deaf ear and kept biting her lips while looking at Nongzhu. On the other hand, Nongzhu was almost the same. Hua Rui came to her senses. She quickly pulled Fairy Qianghua and repeated what ancestor Nanming said. People who could stand next to Bai Changchun were not ordinary people. They couldn't afford to offend them at all. However, her brother-in-law, the handsome and peerless brother-in-law, the brother-in-law named Xiaoyao, the brother-in-law who suddenly disappeared with a baby, she would never mistake him for someone else. That mortal from the mortal world was now standing at the peak of the cultivation world with Bai Changchun. Who exactly was he? Fairy Qianghua came back to her senses. She looked a bit sad. She turned and bowed slightly to ancestor Nanming. I'm the leader of the Moon clan, Qianghua. How do you know me? Forgive this junior's poor eyesight, but I don't think I've seen senior before. Ancestor Nanming, who had been beaten up by Nongzhu in the dark because he had pinched Nongzhu's butt, was wearing a pair of red underpants. With his hands on his hips, he laughed out loud and said, I am the island master of Xian Island. In the cultivation world, people call me Ancestor Nanming. His arrogant and proud laughter echoed in all directions. All the sects in Wuxia were astonished. It turned out that this was Nanming Ancestor, one of the 4 great men who was equally famous as Bai Changchun in the cultivation world. Qianghua Fairy was also slightly surprised. She bowed again and said, Senior Nanming, it's my honor to meet you. Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongzhu and saw that she was glaring at him. He was too lazy to pay attention to her and continued to laugh. I've long heard of Fairy Qianghua's great name. I would like to do my best as a host and invite you to stay on Xian Island as a guest. Would you be willing to give me face? Qianghua Fairy glanced at Nongzhu and replied solemnly, How can I reject your invitation? Good, good, good. Ancestor Nanming laughed and said, Good, 3 times in a row. Then he stopped talking. Almost everyone present could not wrap their heads around this and did not know what was going on. Bai Changchun, on the other hand, glanced at Yu Qianchou who was standing obediently on the side. Nongzhu frowned and seemed to have figured something out in an instant. She stared angrily at Yu Qianchou who looked like an honest man and asked him telepathically, Yu Qianchou, was it you who told Nanming Ancestor Nanming? Yu Qianchou immediately denied it with telepathy, No. *T. Out of the 4 of us, only you and I have seen her. How could Nanming Ancestor Nanming know that she is Qianghua Fairy, the head of the Moon clan? Who else could it be if it wasn't you? Don't accuse a good person here. I was just wondering how Senior Nanming knew her. Yu Qianchou replied, Do you think it's possible that old ancestor Nanming really admired Fairy Viburnum's name for a long time? In addition to Fairy Viburnum's outstanding appearance, he guessed it immediately. Oh my God! Could it be that Senior Nanming has taken a fancy to Fairy Jasper Flower? Oh my God! Then you guys are. Nongzhu's teeth hurt when she heard this. The muscles on her face twitched and a trace of panic flashed across her face. She turned to look at the smiling ancestor Nanming and found that he was staring at Qianghua Fairy with an expression that he had never shown to any woman before. The more she looked, the more she looked like Qianghua Fairy. It was really like what Yu Qianchou had said. At this moment, Bai Changchun slowly floated up into the sky and turned to face the black whirlpool in the white fog that enveloped the East Holy Land. His body gradually rose into the sky. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on the rising figure in the green robe. They all knew what he was going to do. The blue sky, the blue sea, the East Pole opened. Bai Changchun slowly rose into the sky, ready to take the risk alone. Although the figure in the green robe was thin, it gave people a sense of heroism at this moment. Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming's expressions instantly became solemn, and they were vaguely worried. The lords of various countries looked a little expectant, as if they could not wait for Bai Changchun to leave quickly. As for Yu Qianqiu, he seemed to be a little indifferent. He only came here to see how his master entered the legendary East Holy Land. If it was not for the long talk that lasted through the night, Yu Qianqiu would probably also be worried about Bai Changchun. However, after the long talk that lasted through the night, he knew the details of Bai Changchun's cultivation, and basically, he was not worried anymore. Moreover, just in case, he even revealed the secret of the golden bead teleportation and even gave Bai Changchun a bunch of small silver beads so that if Bai Changchun encountered any danger that he could not solve, he could immediately contact him and he would immediately move Bai Changchun out. All the Wuxia cultivators looked at each other, and they all looked at Feng Xiangtian expectantly. Feng Xiangtian had no choice but to bite the bullet and shout loudly, "Senior Bai, the Wuxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, senior." Bai Changchun turned a deaf ear to him and continued to rise. He was already close to the center of the black vortex, swoosh. The lords of various countries stared at Feng Xiangtian like sharp blades, and they could not wait to poke a bloody hole in his body. What does this guy want to do? Does he want to summon Bai Changchun back to deal with us? Feng Xiangtian immediately felt chills all over his body when he was stared at by these people. However, the more he was at this juncture, the more he wanted to save himself. Just as he was about to call for help again, he saw a transparent light shield suddenly appear around Bai Changchun's body. Obviously, Bai Changchun was ready to go in. "Senior Bai, the Wuxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, senior." Feng Xiangtian shouted loudly again and again. However, Bai Changchun did not care about him at all. Even the lords of various countries could not be bothered to reason with him for the time being. All their attention was focused on the sky, and they could not take their eyes off him. Even with Bai Changchun's cultivation, he had released protective aura to protect his body. It could be seen that he did not dare to underestimate the situation and had made thorough preparations. In the rapidly spinning black vortex, dense electric snakes shuttled back and forth like a net, like a monster opening its huge mouth to devour, staring at the green-robed figure floating in the air. Because of the sudden appearance of Bai Changchun in the wind gap, the originally whirling black vortex sucker suddenly made the invisible wind pillar that had no resistance become chaotic, almost turning into tangible wind blades, whipping at Bai Changchun's protective aura chi. Woo-woo. Swoosh swoosh. A shrill and strange sound appeared in the sky, like a giant beast opening its fangs with lightning and roaring. Suddenly, Bai Changchun's figure shot toward the center of the black vortex like a green meteor. Everyone's eyes could hardly react, and they saw the figure crash into the center of the black vortex in the blink of an eye. In an instant, rapid flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder appeared in the black vortex, as if the intruding figure had created a wave that resembled lightning. Then, the movement gradually calmed down, and Bai Changchun's figure completely disappeared in the black vortex. Everyone present held their breaths with rapt attention. No one even breathed loudly. Although they saw Bai Changchun enter, they still stared fixedly at the black whirlpool with lightning bolts swirling around it. After a long time, it was estimated that the 6 hours of the opening of the Holy East Land was over. The black vortex embedded in the white fog gradually shrank, and the lightning in it shone with green light. Finally, along with the shrinking black vortex, it disappeared in the vast white fog. In an instant, the world returned to normal, and the rapid spinning sound disappeared. There was only the sound of the sea breeze blowing and the sound of the waves hitting the rocky shore. Everyone came back to their senses and looked at each other, especially the lords of the various countries. All of them let out a sigh of relief and looked at each other with an irrepressible smile of excitement. The number one expert in the world who had suppressed everyone for many years was finally gone. The terrifying expert who made everyone tremble with fear was finally gone. The god of death finally went to the Holy East Land where he would never return. The stone that had been pressing on everyone's hearts for many years was finally removed. The haze that had shrouded their hearts for many years was finally blown away. Breathing in the free sea breeze of Xian Island, they could feel a trace of sweetness. Pei Fang's eyes flickered as he looked around. After making eye contact with Qi Zhejuan and Ouyangde, Pei Fang couldn't help but let out an arrogant "ga" laughter towards the sky. The two of them also laughed heartily. Their laughter echoed in the sky above Xian Island. The time that belonged to them had finally arrived. Bai Changchun was gone, and Yin Baikong was dead. As long as the three of them united, Bing Chengzi and Hu Changsho would not be difficult to deal with. As long as they took care of these two. Although when Lanfeng's cultivation was high, he was actually the easiest person to deal with. As long as they spent some time and played some tricks, they would not have to worry about not being able to deal with him. As long as they took care of these three people, from now on, no one in this world would be able to restrict their freedom. How could they not be happy when they thought of the day where they could freely roam the world after cultivating for a lifetime? The people of the Chinese cultivation world already felt that the situation was not good. They all regretted coming here. Now, it was tantamount to sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. All of them started to beat a retreat in their hearts and slowly retreated, hoping that the lords of the various countries would not bother with them now that they were in high spirits. This person could always come up with childish ideas to comfort me when he was on the verge of despair. Actually, most of the spirit-severing realm lords were indeed in high spirits and did not have any thoughts of taking care of them now. However, when Yan Ji glanced over, his killing intent instantly rose. He immediately shouted angrily, "All of you, stop!" His proud disciple had died in the Chinese cultivation world. He had long since lost his good impression of the Chinese cultivators. How could he let them go now? Chapter 7:11. Before he finished speaking, Yan Ji's figure had already disappeared from where he was and blocked the retreat of the Wuxia sections. He floated in the air with a ferocious expression and sneered, "Want to run? Since you've delivered yourselves to me, why don't you all stay here?" The small sects that had been standing at the back immediately became the first to retreat. Some of them even almost bumped into Yan Ji, who had suddenly appeared. They were so frightened that they quickly retreated with their flying celestial devices. The Wuxia sects were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They were all in a mess, huddling together and taking unnecessary precautions. Seeing this scene, many of the feudal lords burst into laughter. Yan Ji was obviously very proud of his ability to scare the Wuxia sects like this. He pointed at the sect that almost bumped into him and said arrogantly, "How dare you talk back to me? All of you kneel and kowtow to apologize, or I'll start with you first." There were only 3 people standing on the small flying celestial device. Hearing this, all of them were extremely indignant. However, they were no match for Yan Ji, who was a legendary soul formation expert. They might not be able to escape today. Nongzhu and the great ancestor of Nanming silently looked at the wild lords of the various countries and didn't say anything. These people had been suppressed by Bai Changchun for many years. Now that Bai Changchun had left, they would probably vent their pent-up anger on these Wuxia cultivators. It was understandable. But then again, did it matter to them whether the Wuxia cultivators lived or died? For those who struggled in the cultivation world, life and death were all decided in an instant. Life and death were not important. This was actually a part of cultivation. It all depended on whether one could break through safely. However, Yu Qianzhou's expression was not so good. He had long known that these Wuxia cultivators would definitely be unlucky to break through at this time. Otherwise, Bai Changchun wouldn't have let the 4 clans leave first. There were some things that Bai Changchun was well aware of. The world was full of misfortunes. Once he left, it would be useless to worry about what would happen after him. For the sake of his relationship with the 4 great families, he had stayed for a while and bought time for the 4 great families to leave. He had already done his best. Yu Qianzhou was well aware of this, which was why he helped Bai Changchun urge the 4 families to leave. Although he himself did not have a good impression of the people of the Chinese cultivation world, and after the long talk with Bai Changchun that night, his view of the situation was no longer limited to the Chinese cultivation world, but the whole world. If Yan Ji were to kill someone, he might weigh the pros and cons and turn a blind eye to it in order to protect himself. However, Yan Ji actually made a Chinese cultivator kneel and accept the humiliation. After all, he was born in the Wuxia cultivation world. It was difficult for him to watch the Wuxia cultivators being humiliated before their death. He had the urge to stand up for the Wuxia cultivators. This kind of impulsive nature was called bloodthirstiness. In his previous life, it was because of this kind of uncontrollable bloodthirstiness that ultimately led to the tragic end of his fate. Yu Qianzhou clenched his fists, but in the end, he still endured it. Nongzhu slightly tilted her head and glanced at him. At this moment, one of the three people on the flying celestial device that almost hit Yan Ji suddenly turned around and shouted, "Yu Qianzhou, I am Tu Yanfeng, an elder of the Wuxia Imperial Sword Sect. Do you remember what you said to me in the Cultivation Alliance?" Everyone stared at Yu Qianzhou. Nongzhu and the ancestor of Nanming also looked at him curiously, wondering what on earth Yu Qianzhou had said to him. Many Wuxia cultivators remembered that when Yu Qianzhou left the Cultivation Alliance, he had promised Tu Yanfeng that if the Imperial Sword Sect encountered any trouble, he could use the name of Yu Qianzhou. Tu Yanfeng was a straightforward person. Otherwise, he would not have clashed with Yu Qianzhou even though he knew that he was no match for him. At this critical moment, he still spoke tactfully. Although he wanted to beg Yu Qianzhou, he only reminded Yu Qianzhou if he still remembered what he had said in the past. If Yu Qianzhou had forgotten, he would not say anything more. He just wanted to try with a glimmer of hope. Yu Qianzhou was stunned. He stared at Tu Yanfeng's face and tried to recognize him. He immediately remembered what Tu Yanfeng said when he pretended to be generous and let him go. Although he clearly saw Yan Ji staring at him with a pair of cold eyes that were filled with killing intent, he still smiled. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Elder Tu from the Imperial Sword School. Since we're old acquaintances, please come and have a chat." Before Tu Yanfeng could reply, the head of the Imperial Sword Sect had already flown over on his flying celestial device and floated in front of Yu Qianzhou. Tu Yanfeng glanced at the head slightly and looked a little embarrassed. At the head's greeting, the three of them jumped down, put away their flying celestial devices, and bowed to Ancestor Nanming, Nongzhu, and Yu Qianzhou. Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu just looked at them expressionlessly and had no intention of paying attention to them. Instead, Yu Qianzhou cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Elder Tu, I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been?" Tu Yanfeng looked a little ashamed. He lowered his head and cupped his hands, not saying anything. Yu Qianzhou nodded with a smile. To be honest, this kind of person who was too ashamed was not suitable to live in the cultivation world, but he admired him. He. Yan Ji stared at them and sneered. He squinted his eyes and asked, "Yu Qianzhou, what do you mean? Do you want to protect them from me?" Yu Qianzhou's gaze slowly shifted from Tu Yanfeng to Yan Ji. He asked in a neutral tone, "From what you're saying, could it be that you want to kill them from my hands?" The meaning of his words could not be clearer. It was obvious that he wanted to protect the people of the Imperial Sword School. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming frowned at the same time. Among the feudal lords, many people were already laughing mockingly. They were laughing at Yu Qianzhou for overestimating himself. Yan Ji immediately threw his head back and laughed loudly. "You want to protect them? I haven't even settled the score of killing this old man's disciple, but you've already delivered yourself to me." Yu Qianzhou said disdainfully, "Old man, it's not that I'm looking down on you, but I'm standing right here. If you have the ability, come and try to touch me." Presumptuous. It's time to settle the score between us. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong rose into the air and stood at the same level as the people on the mountain peak. Although their words were directed at Yu Qianzhou, they were also staring at Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming. Their meaning was clear. They wanted to suppress ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu, preventing them from interfering with Yan Ji's killing of Yu Qianzhou. Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming's faces darkened. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. They were ready to protect Yu Qianzhou. Nongzhu, in particular, took out the bamboo flute from her waist and held it in her hand. Her whole body was bursting with fighting spirit. She could not tolerate someone bullying Bai Changchun's disciple. As soon as he left, seeing that someone was cooperating with him, Yan Ji was full of smiles. He shook his head and said, Yu Qianzhou. Yu Qianzhou. I wanted to spare your life today for the sake of Bai Changchun. Who knew that you would come to me to court death? Bai Changchun is not here anymore. Who do you think you are? Give me your life. With a loud shout, Yan Ji turned into a shadow and directly rushed over. He was as fast as lightning, carrying the momentum of wind and thunder. He arrived in the blink of an eye. Almost at the same time, Nongzhu shouted angrily, Nanming, protect Yu Qianzhou. He had already rushed out. With a loud bang, the two phantoms collided and directly collided together. Obviously, Nongzhu's cultivation was higher. Yan Ji let out a muffled groan, and his body was directly knocked back. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong looked at each other and nodded solemnly. They both shot toward Nongzhu in the air. In an instant, Nongzhu split into two figures in the air and faced the two of them respectively. Bang, bang. A strong bang set off a raging airwave, forcing the Wuxia cultivators to almost lose their balance on their flying celestial devices. All of them stared at the duel between the two masters of the soul formation stage in horror. They were too powerful. The aftershock of the fight was not something they could bear. Holding a golden net in his hand, Nanming ancestor moved to the side of Yu Qianzhou and watched the fight in the sky with a red face. Yu Qianzhou's eyes were like an owl. Two balls of black flames were jumping rapidly in his eyes, and the killing intent on his face could not be suppressed. The three people who were fighting fiercely turned into two messy shadows. Bang, bang, bang. They directly flew up into the sky. The lords of the various countries watched the fight with interest. It seemed that they wanted to see who would be the unlucky one. Pei Fang, in particular, had a beaming smile on his face. Yan Ji, who was knocked away, stopped retreating. He looked down at his chest, where a very conspicuous footprint was left. He raised his hand angrily and wiped off a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. A shiny black whip appeared in his hand. He stared at the sky and shouted angrily, Nongzhu, today is the day you die. His figure shot up into the sky. Just you? Nongzhu snorted disdainfully. Suddenly, hundreds of Nongzhu appeared in the sky and surrounded Hua Zongming, Pu Taidong, and Yan Ji. The four people fought fiercely and crazily in the sky. The shadows intertwined in the sky, fighting back and forth. Loud noises were heard constantly, and the airwaves covered the sky and the earth. Those whose cultivation was below the deification stage could not tell who the four people were. In the angry rebuke, Nongzhu actually fought evenly against the three people. At this time, the three people in the sky were fighting against Nongzhu, but it seemed that Nongzhu had surrounded the three of them. Others might not see the reason, but the lords of the deification stage from various countries looked at each other in dismay. They all seemed to find it hard to believe. Because they could see that Nongzhu was fighting against three people, and she actually had the upper hand. Many people could not associate the previous Nongzhu, who did not do proper work, with the current Nongzhu who was fierce and fierce. It was really unexpected. The four people in the fierce battle were all at the middle stage of deification, but Nongzhu was not at a disadvantage against three people. Pei Fang squinted at the sky and said, Nongzhu's transfiguration transposition skill is really worthy of its reputation. Coupled with her good cultivation, I'm afraid Hua Zongming and the other two people can't take advantage of her. It seems that Nongzhu is not far from breaking through the final stage of deification. When he said the last sentence, there was a hint of gloominess in his tone. Qi Jiujuan said expressionlessly, "It's a pity that Mu Sang, Miao Hanyuan, and Xu are not here. Otherwise, we can see if Nongzhu can fight against 6 people with her transfiguration transposition skill." Pei Fong chuckled and said, "Mu Sang and Miao Hanyuan will naturally help when they are here. However, Xu seems to be in the same boat as Nongzhu. I don't know who will help who." His words immediately made the lords of various countries laugh. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.